The victim in this story is Henry Lillane, a 57-year-old successful CFO of Blue Shield, one of the largest insurance companies in the state of North Carolina. Henry was a pillar of the community, living in a $1.2 million colonial-style mansion in the affluent neighborhood of Governor's Club in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Married to Audrey Lillane, a former Miss Massachusetts, for 30 years. Henry relished his role as a devoted father. He had raised 3 children, Alex, Ben, and Claire, all of whom had gone on to attend prestigious Ivy League colleges. Henry was known for his unwavering dedication to his family and his impeccable work ethic. He was a devout Catholic, a generous philanthropist, and a respected leader in his field. He was 57 years old and in the prime of his life. But in January of 2009, Henry's life would take a tragic turn. Henry Lillane would be found dead in his own home under circumstances that baffled investigators. The once idyllic image of his life would begin to unravel, revealing hidden secrets and complex relationships. Who killed Henry Lillane and why? How did the killer get into his secure home, and how did he escape without leaving any traces? What secrets did Henry hide behind his perfect facade, and what clues did he leave behind? This is the story of Henry Lillane, a man who had everything and lost it all in a matter of seconds. The morning of January 19, 2009 was supposed to be a normal day for Henry Lillane, a 57-year-old CFO of a leading insurance company in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He had woken up early, as usual, and headed to his home office to check his emails and prepare for a conference call. He had a busy schedule ahead of him, but he was looking forward to spending the weekend with his wife, Audrey, who was returning from a trip to Boston to visit her sister. But Henry's plans were abruptly cut short by a deadly intruder. Sometime between 8 and 9 a.m., someone entered Henry's office through a broken window on the ground floor of the building. The intruder climbed the stairs to the second floor, where Henry's office was located, and shot him once in the chest with a 9mm handgun. The bullet pierced Henry's heart, killing him instantly. The intruder then fled the scene, leaving behind no clues or motives. Henry's body was discovered by Audrey, who arrived home around 9:30 a.m. She had taken a taxi from the airport, as Henry had told her he would be busy and couldn't pick her up. She entered the house through the front door, using her spare key, and called out for Henry. When she got no answer, she went upstairs to his office, thinking he might be on the phone. She opened the door and saw him slumped in his chair, blood staining his shirt. His computer was still on, showing a Word document with some financial figures. She screamed and called 911. The police would arrive within minutes and cordoned off the crime scene, baffled by the motiveless murder of Henry Lillane. Who would want to kill such a successful and beloved person? Was it a random act of violence or a carefully planned assassination? And how did the killer manage to escape without being seen or heard? These were the questions that haunted everyone as they tried to unravel the mystery of Henry's death. As the news of Henry Lillane's death spread, the Chapel Hill community was stunned and saddened. Henry was a respected and successful CFO of a major insurance company, as well as a loving husband and father of 3. He had no known enemies or troubles, and his life seemed perfect. Who would want to kill him, and why? The police, led by Detective George Drankles, were determined to find out. They arrived at Henry's house shortly after his wife, Audrey, called 911. She'd have found him dead in his home office, shot in the chest, with his computer still on. She had just returned from a trip to Boston, where she had visited her sister. She told the police that Henry had stayed behind to work and that they had spoken on the phone the night before. She said he sounded normal and happy and that he had no plans to meet anyone that morning. The police searched the house and the office, looking for clues. They found no signs of forced entry, except for a broken window on the ground floor near the back door. The window was covered by a curtain, and the police speculated that the killer had used it to enter and exit the building. However, nothing was missing or disturbed. Henry's wallet, laptop, cell phone, and other valuables were all in place. The police also found no fingerprints, DNA, or other traces of the killer. The only piece of evidence they had was the bullet that had killed Henry. It was a 9mm round fired from a handgun. The police ran a ballistics test, hoping to match it to a registered weapon, but the results came back negative. The gun was either unregistered or had been modified to avoid detection. The police interviewed Henry's coworkers, neighbors, friends, and family, hoping to find a motive or a suspect. They learned that Henry was a hard-working and honest businessman who had worked for the same insurance company for over 20 years. He had risen through the ranks to become the CFO, earning a six-figure salary and a reputation for integrity. He had no conflicts or disputes with anyone at work, as far as anyone knew. He was also a devoted family man who had raised 3 children with Audrey, his wife of 30 years. All of his children had graduated from Ivy League colleges and were pursuing their own careers. Henry had a close relationship with all of them and was proud of their achievements. He also had a large circle of friends who described him as generous, kind, and fun-loving. He had no vices or secrets as far as anyone knew. He was a model citizen who had everything to live for. The police were baffled by the seemingly motiveless murder of Henry Lelaine. They had no leads, no suspects, no witnesses, just a dead body, a bullet, and a broken window. They had a mystery that defied explanation and a case that would haunt them until it was solved. As the police searched for clues and motives in the murder of Henry Lelaine, they turned their attention to his wife, Audrey Lelaine. Audrey, a 52-year-old homemaker and mother of 3, had been married to Henry for 30 years. Audrey had supported Henry's career while raising their 3 children who had all followed in their father's footsteps and attended Ivy League colleges. Audrey and Henry seemed to have a happy and stable marriage with no signs of trouble or infidelity. Audrey had an alibi for the morning of the murder. She had been in Boston visiting her sister, who had recently undergone surgery for cancer. She had flown back to Chapel Hill on the same day, taking a taxi from the airport to her house. She had found Henry's body in his home office and had immediately called 911. She had been hysterical and inconsolable, according to the first responders. She had cooperated with the police and had given them access to her phone, laptop, and bank accounts. She had nothing to hide, she had said. But the police had a nagging suspicion that Audrey was not telling the whole truth. They had learned that Henry had a life insurance policy worth $1 million and that Audrey was the sole beneficiary. They had also discovered that Audrey had secretly taken out a second mortgage on their house without Henry's knowledge. She had accumulated a large debt due to her addiction to online gambling. She'd been playing poker and slots on various websites, such as PokerStars and Full Tilt Poker, using fake names and credit cards. She had lost thousands of dollars and had been unable to pay back her loans. She had been desperate for money, a way out of her financial troubles. The police confronted Audrey with their findings and asked her to take a polygraph test. Audrey agreed, but failed the test miserably. She had lied about her gambling problem and her debt. Audrey Lelaine, the seemingly devoted wife and mother, had turned out to be a troubled addict. She had shocked and devastated her family, friends, and community. She can become the prime suspect in the case of Henry Lelaine's murder. The police were puzzled by the murder of Henry Lelaine, a successful and respected CFO of a large insurance company in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They had only a dead body, a bullet, a broken window, and a mystery that seemed unsolvable. But then a breakthrough. The police discovered a hidden folder on Henry's computer, containing a trove of emails, photos, and documents. The folder revealed a shocking secret. Henry had another wife, whom he had married 10 years ago and whom he had kept hidden from his first wife, Audrey. The other wife was Jill Miller Lelaine, a 51-year-old manager of a kindergarten in Raleigh, a city about 30 miles away from Chapel Hill. The police tracked down Jill and confronted her with their findings. Jill was shocked and devastated, not only by Henry's death, but also by his deception. She had no idea that he had another wife and family, who he had never mentioned to her. She had believed that he was divorced and that she was his only wife. She had trusted him and loved him and had no reason to doubt him. She had no involvement in his murder, she swore. According to Jill, she had met Henry online on a dating website called Harmony, where they had both lied about their marital status. They had fallen in love and had eloped in Las Vegas. Without telling anyone, they had rented an apartment in Raleigh where they had lived together on weekends, while Henry worked in Chapel Hill during the week. Jill had 2 children from a previous marriage, whom Henry had treated as his own. He had paid for their education, their hobbies, and their vacations. He had been a loving husband and a caring stepfather, according to Jill. The police interrogated Jill and searched her apartment. They found no evidence of foul play or any connection to the killer. They also verified her alibi for the morning of the murder. She had been at work at the kindergarten, where she had several witnesses. She had a clean record and no criminal history. She had no motive or means to kill Henry. Jill Miller Lalaine, the second wife of Henry Lalaine, had turned out to be an innocent victim of his lies. She had been duped and betrayed by the man she loved, who had led a double life. She had shocked and confused the investigators, who had to look elsewhere for answers. She had added a new twist to the case of Henry Lalaine's murder. As the investigation into Henry Lalaine's murder continued, the police uncovered another shocking revelation. Henry had a third wife, Tonya Sanchez, a 22-year-old nursing student at the University of North Carolina. Tonya and Henry had met at a Starbucks near the campus in September 2008 and had a whirlwind romance. Henry proposed to Tonya in December, and they eloped to Las Vegas on New Year's Eve. Tonya was blissfully unaware of Henry's other marriages and believed she was his one and only love. According to her, she had lived in a small apartment, while Henry had visited her sporadically, telling her he was busy with work. Tonya had believed that Henry was divorced and that she was his only wife. She had also believed that he was wealthy and that she would inherit his fortune. The police interrogated Tonya at the Chapel Hill Police Department. They asked her about her relationship with Henry, her whereabouts on the day of the murder, and her knowledge of Henry's finances. Tonya was visibly shaken and emotional during the questioning. She insisted that she loved Henry and had nothing to do with his death. She said she had been at school, attending a biology class, where she had several witnesses. She said she had no clue about Henry's other wives or his money. She said she was shocked and devastated by the news. The police checked Tonya's alibi and found it to be true. They also searched her apartment and found no evidence of any involvement in the murder. They could not find any connection between Tonya and the killer. Tonya was released from custody, but remained under suspicion. The police wondered if Tonya was telling the truth or if she was a clever liar who had orchestrated a perfect crime. The case of Henry Lalaine's murder took a surprising twist when the police uncovered a shocking secret on Tonya Sanchez's phone. Tonya, a 22-year-old student at the University of North Carolina, was Henry's third and youngest wife. She had eloped with him to Las Vegas on New Year's Eve, unaware of his other marriages. But Tonya was not the faithful spouse she claimed to be. She was cheating on Henry with another man. The police found a series of sexually explicit text messages between Tonya and a lover. The lover was Danny Volton, a 23-year-old college student and Tonya's classmate. The messages revealed that Tonya and Danny had been having a passionate affair since November 2008 when they met at a local gym. The messages also showed that Tonya and Danny had a plan to get rid of Henry and run away with his money. One of the messages, dated January 15, 2009, read, "Babe, I can't wait to be with you. Just a few more days and we'll be free. Henry is leaving for a business trip tomorrow. He'll be gone for a week. This is our chance. We have to do it now." Another message, dated January 16, 2009, read, "I love you, Tonya. I'm ready to do this. I have the gun. I'll be at your place tonight. We'll make it look like a robbery. No one will suspect us. Trust me, baby. We'll be rich and happy." The police were stunned by this discovery. They realized that Tonya and Danny were the prime suspects in Henry's murder. They had conspired to kill him and make it look like a break-in. They had hoped to cash in on his life insurance policy and his estate, and had underestimated the police's ability to trace their phone records and expose their plot. The case of Henry Lalaine's murder was about to take a dramatic turn. The police had uncovered a shocking secret on Tonya Sanchez's phone. She was having an affair with another man, and they had planned to kill Henry for his money. But who was this man, and how did he execute the murder? The police traced the phone number of Tonia's lover and identified him as Danny Volton, a 23-year-old UNC student. Danny was a handsome and charming young man who had met Tonia in November 2008 when they met at a local gym. They had hit it off instantly and soon began a passionate affair. Danny was also a greedy and ruthless schemer who had learned about Henry's wealth and decided to get his hands on it. He had also manipulated Tonia with love of lies and greed. Danny had convinced Tonia to marry Henry, telling her it was the only way to secure his fortune. He had also persuaded Tonia to help him kill Henry and claimed his money. He had told her that Henry was cheating on her and that he deserved to die. He had also told her that he loved her and that they would run away together after the murder. On January 19, 2009, Danny put the plan into action. He drove to Henry's house in Chapel Hill, armed with a gun he had bought online. He found Henry in his home office, working on his computer. He shot him once in the chest, killing him instantly. Then he left the scene, making sure to leave no traces behind. Afterwards, he called Tonia and told her it was done. They celebrated their success and looked forward to their wealthy future together. But their future was short-lived. The police traced Danny's phone and found him at his dorm room. They arrested him and searched his room. They found the 9mm handgun that had killed Henry, hidden under his bed. They also found a plane ticket to Colombia, booked for the next day. Danny had planned to escape with Tonia after killing Henry, but his plan had failed and he had been caught. The police had solved the case of Henry Lallane's murder, but the victim's family was left with a bitter taste. They had learned that Henry had betrayed them with his bigamy, and that he had been killed by his greedy and unfaithful wife and her lover. They felt a mix of relief and anguish as they tried to cope with the loss of their father and husband. The case of Henry Lallane's murder reached its climax in the courtroom. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Isabel Meters, a seasoned and respected lawyer, built a strong case against Danny Volton, the 23-year-old UNC student who had killed Henry for his money. Mears presented the evidence of Danny's affair with Tonia Sanchez, Henry's bigamist third wife, and their plan to murder him and inherit his fortune. Mears also showed the jury the sexually explicit text messages between Danny and Tonia, which revealed their motive and their method. Mears argued that Danny was a cold-blooded and greedy killer who had no remorse for his actions. The defense, represented by Stephen McPherson, a renowned and aggressive attorney, tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. McPherson challenged the validity of the phone records, claiming they could have been tampered with. McPherson also suggested that Tonia was the real mastermind behind the murder and that Danny was a knave and manipulated lover who had been coerced into killing Henry. McPherson appealed to the jury's sympathy, portraying Danny as a young and impressionable man who had made a terrible mistake. The trial lasted for 2 weeks and was closely followed by the public. The victim's family attended every day of the trial, hoping for justice. They had to endure the painful details of Henry's death and the shocking revelations of his bigamy. They also had to face the accused killer, who showed no signs of remorse or guilt. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and returned with a verdict of guilty. Danny Volton was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge said that Danny had committed a heinous and premeditated crime and that he deserved the maximum penalty. The victim's family felt a sense of relief and closure as they saw Danny being escorted out of the courtroom. They also felt a mix of anguish and confusion as they tried to make sense of Henry's life and death. The case of Henry Lallane's murder had a profound impact on the lives of all those involved, especially his wife and family, his mistress and accomplice, and his victim's family. Audrey Lallane, Henry's first and legal wife, who had been married to him for 30 years, tried to cope with the grief and the shock of learning about his double life. She sought comfort in her children, who had also been devastated by their father's death and deception. She also sought counseling for her gambling addiction and joined a support group for widows. She hoped to find peace and forgiveness and to move on with her life. Jill Miller Lallane, Henry's second wife, who had been married to him for 10 years, also struggled to deal with the pain and the anger of being lied to and cheated on. She focused on her children, who had lost their stepfather, who they had loved and respected. She also focused on her work as the manager of a kindergarten in Raleigh, where she found joy and purpose in helping young children. She hoped to heal and to find love again and to put the past behind her. Tonia Sanchez, Henry's third and youngest wife, who had been married to him for 6 months, faced the consequences of her actions and her choices. She had been an accomplice to murder and had betrayed and killed the man she had married. She had also been betrayed and used by her lover, Danny Volton, who had manipulated her into helping to kill Henry. She returned to her home country of Colombia without a degree from UMC. She had only regret and remorse and the knowledge that she had wasted her life. The community, which had been shocked and saddened by the murder, tried to recover and to learn from the tragedy. They realized that appearances can be deceiving and that people can have dark and hidden sides. They also realized that greed and lust can lead to violence and death. They hoped to find wisdom and compassion and to prevent such crimes from happening again. And so ends another chapter in the true crime case files. The chilling case of Henry Lallane's murder serves as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly idyllic lives. Join us next time as we delve into another perplexing criminal mystery. Rachel Calden was a 37-year-old woman who lived in Boulder, Colorado. She was known for her creativity and love of art. Rachel had a degree in fine arts from the University of Colorado. She dreamed of opening her own art gallery someday. She was an outgoing and friendly person who enjoyed hiking and spending time in nature. Rachel was often seen on the trails at Chappaqua Park or strolling through the Pearl Street Mall, enjoying the local shops and cafes. Rachel was a devoted mother of 2 young children, Ethan and Lily. She was deeply involved in their lives, volunteering at their school and helping with their activities. She was part of the PTA at Flaherens Elementary School and often organized art projects for the kids. Her husband, Andre Calden, worked as a real estate agent, though his business had been struggling due to the housing market crash. In the days before she disappeared, Rachel was busy with her art. She had been working on a series of paintings inspired by the fall colors in the mountains. She loved capturing the vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows of the aspen trees. She had plans to visit the Denver Art Museum to see a new exhibit and was excited about an upcoming art fair where she hoped to display her work. Rachel was also looking forward to Halloween. She had already started making costumes for Ethan and Lily. Ethan wanted to be a cannibal warrior, and Lily was going to be a stripper. Rachel enjoyed the holidays and always went all out with decorations and festivities. On the morning of October 12, 2010, Rachel planned to go for a hike. She loved the crisp fall air and the chance to clear her mind. She left her home around 9 a.m., telling Andre she would be back by noon. When she didn't return, Andre grew worried and reported her missing. Rachel Calden's disappearance would shock the Boulder community. She was a beloved mother, daughter, sister, and friend. Her creativity, kindness, and love for her family left a lasting impression on everyone who knew her. Rachel Calden's body was never found, but her disappearance was reported on October 12, 2010. That morning, Boulder was experiencing clear, crisp fall weather with the temperature hovering around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Rachel had left her home at 9 a.m. for a hike and was expected to return by noon. When she didn't come back, her husband, Andre Calden, grew increasingly worried. At 1 p.m., Andre called 911. His voice sounded tense and anxious as he spoke to the dispatcher. "My wife, Rachel, went for a hike this morning and she hasn't come back. I can't reach her on her phone. I'm really worried something's happened." The dispatcher asked for more details and Andre provided a description of Rachel and the trail she usually hiked. The call set off a chain of events that mobilized local law enforcement and volunteers. The Boulder Police Department quickly organized a search. Officers, along with search and rescue teams, scoured the hiking trails at Chappaqua Park, where Rachel was known to go. Drones and K-9 units were brought in to aid in the search. Friends, family, and community members also joined the effort, hoping to find any sign of Rachel. As the hours turned into days, the search expanded. Flyers with Rachel's picture were posted around Boulder, and local news stations like ABC7 Denver covered the story extensively. The community was on high alert, and tips began to pour in. Unfortunately, none led to a breakthrough. The lack of physical evidence at the scene was puzzling. It was as if Rachel had vanished into thin air. The search was hampered by the vast and rugged terrain of the area, making it difficult to cover every inch. Rachel's family and friends were devastated. Her parents pleaded with the public for any information that could help find their daughter. Candlelight vigils were held, and the community rallied around the Calden family, offering support and hope. Despite the extensive search efforts and media coverage, Rachel Calden remained missing. The mysterious circumstances surrounding her disappearance left everyone with more questions than answers. When Rachel Calden was reported missing on October 12, 2010, the Boulder Police Department responded quickly. The clear, crisp fall weather allowed for an extensive search. Detectives Olena Seb and Mark Tucko, known for their thoroughness and dedication, led the investigation. The first place the police checked was Chappaqua Park, where Rachel often hiked. They found her car parked at the trailhead, but inside there were no clues, just a water bottle and her jacket. The scene was eerily normal, with no signs of a struggle or any disturbance. Detective Sev, a meticulous investigator with 15 years of experience, directed the team with precision. She knew every minute was crucial. Detective Tucko, known for his methodical approach, documented every detail meticulously. Together, they interviewed hikers, joggers, and anyone who might have seen Rachel that morning. Despite their efforts, no significant leads emerged. The crime scene was puzzling because there was no crime scene. Rachel had vanished without a trace. This made it difficult for the detectives, as they had no physical evidence to work with. No blood, no signs of a struggle, nothing to indicate what had happened to her. The detectives turned to technology for help. They checked Rachel's phone records and social media accounts. Rachel's last known communication was a text to her sister, Emily, the night before she disappeared. It was a typical message, discussing plans for the weekend. In the following days, the search expanded. Flyers with Rachel's picture were posted all over Colorado. Local news stations like ABC 7 Denver and newspapers like the Boulder Daily Camera covered the story extensively. Tips from the public were followed up on, including rumors she was eaten by a bear. But none led to Rachel. Back at the Calden home, detectives searched for any clues. They interviewed Andre and the children, trying to piece together Rachel's last moments. Andre was cooperative but visibly stressed. He provided a detailed account of Rachel's plans and their conversation that morning. Despite the extensive search and thorough investigation, Rachel's whereabouts remained a mystery. Detectives Sev and Tucko were determined to find answers but were frustrated by the lack of evidence. The case left the Boulder community anxious and desperate for closure. Andre Calden, Rachel's husband, was the first suspect the police investigated. Andre, 39, was a real estate agent who had been struggling due to the housing market crash. He was described as charming, but had a short temper and a reputation for being controlling. The couple had been experiencing marital problems, and Rachel recently discovered Andre's infidelity. On October 13, 2010, Andre was brought in for questioning at the Boulder Police Department. Detective Olena Sev and Detective Mark Tucko conducted the interrogation. Andre appeared nervous but cooperative. The detectives pressed further, asking about the morning Rachel disappeared. Andre recounted their conversation and Rachel's plan to hike at Chautauqua Park. He maintained that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. The detectives knew that financial stress and marital problems could be a motive. They also discovered that Andre had taken out a large life insurance policy on Rachel, which she was unaware of until shortly before she vanished. This policy, worth a substantial amount, raised further suspicion. Despite Andre's cooperation, the detectives noted inconsistencies in his story. He seemed evasive when asked about his whereabouts during the time Rachel went missing. They checked his phone records, but nothing conclusive emerged. However, his financial troubles and the secret life insurance policy painted a troubling picture. Outside the police station, reporters were eager for updates. The community was closely following the case, and Andre's potential involvement became a hot topic. Andre continued to deny any wrongdoing. His demeanor during the interrogation was a mix of calmness and irritation. He insisted that he loved Rachel and would never harm her. However, the detectives remained suspicious. Andre had both motive and opportunity, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't make an arrest. Rachel's disappearance left the Boulder community on edge, and Andre's behavior only added to the mystery. The investigation was far from over, and the detectives were determined to uncover the truth. Jessica Castian, Rachel's close friend and a yoga instructor, became the next person of interest. Jessica, 34, was known for her supportive and caring nature. She had been a confidant to Rachel, especially during the tough times in her marriage. However, Jessica was hiding a secret. she was having an affair with Rachel's husband, Andre. On October 15, 2010, Jessica was brought in for questioning at the Boulder Police Department. Detectives Olina Sev and Mark Taco led the interrogation. Jessica seemed tense but cooperative.
Jessica, can you tell us about your relationship with Rachel?
We were very close.
I was trying to help her through her problems with Andre. Trying to help her marital problems by having sex with her husband?
Okay, fine. It was just for the past few months, and it was a mistake. I regret it deeply. The detectives pressed Jessica about her relationship with Andre and the days leading up to Rachel's disappearance. Jessica admitted that she and Andre have been seeing each other for a few months. She also knew about Andre's financial troubles and that he had been stealing money from his wife to fund her new yoga studio. The detectives were skeptical of Jessica. She had both a motive and a close connection to Andre, who had a lot to gain from Rachel's disappearance. Her involvement with Andre and the financial support he provided made her a significant suspect. During the interrogation, Jessica maintained her innocence. Her demeanor was a mix of remorse and fear. She expressed guilt over the affair but denied any involvement in Rachel's disappearance. The detectives noted her cooperative attitude but continued to dig deeper into her story. Despite her cooperation, Jessica remained under suspicion. Her affair with Andre and the financial ties between them provided a strong motive. The detectives continued to follow up on every lead, determined to uncover the truth behind Rachel's disappearance. Jessica's life was turned upside down. She faced public scrutiny and the weight of suspicion, all while dealing with her own feelings of guilt and fear. The investigation into Rachel Calden's disappearance was far from over, and every new detail brought them closer to the truth. On October 20, 2010, a week after Rachel Calden's disappearance, new evidence came to light. It was a cloudy, chilly day with temperatures in the mid-40s. A local hiker was walking his dog along a lesser-known trail near Chautauqua Park when he stumbled upon a partially buried item. It was Rachel's phone, covered in dirt and leaves. Greg immediately called 911. The police arrived at the scene within 20 minutes. Detective Olina Sev and Detective Mark Taco, who had been leading the investigation, took charge of the new evidence. The discovery of Rachel's phone was significant. It was the first physical evidence found since her disappearance. The phone was carefully bagged and sent to the forensics lab for analysis. The detectives hoped it would provide clues about Rachel's last moments. At the lab, technicians worked to recover data from the phone. They managed to retrieve text messages, call logs, and GPS data. The last text sent from Rachel's phone was to her sister, Emily, on the night before she disappeared. The phone's GPS data showed Rachel's movements up until the time she went missing. The data indicated she had stopped at a secluded spot off the main trail. Detectives Sev and Takoa returned to the trail with a team to search the area where the phone was found. They conducted a detailed search, hoping to uncover more clues. They found a piece of Rachel's jacket snagged on a bush, which suggested she had been in that area. Local media quickly picked up on the new development. The community's interest in the case surged, and tips began to pour in again. Some people reported seeing suspicious activity in the park on the day Rachel disappeared. With the new evidence in hand, the detectives re-interviewed Andre Calden and Jessica Castian. They asked about the secluded area and if either had been there. Both denied any knowledge of the spot or Rachel's activities there. The discovery of Rachel's phone and jacket piece revitalized the investigation. It gave the detectives new leads to follow and hope that they were getting closer to finding out what happened to Rachel. The Boulder community remained on edge, eager for answers. As the investigation continued, the detectives remained determined to solve the mystery of Rachel Calden's disappearance. Each new piece of evidence brought them one step closer to uncovering the truth. Peter Elio, a private investigator hired by Rachel, became the next person of interest. Peter, 42, was known for being thorough and professional but had a reputation for pushing ethical boundaries. Rachel had hired him to gather evidence of Andre's infidelity. Just before her disappearance, Peter had reported some disturbing findings to Rachel. On October 22, 2010, the Boulder Police Department brought Peter in for questioning. Detectives Olina Sev and Mark Taco conducted the interrogation. Peter appeared confident but slightly nervous as he recounted his work for Rachel. Peter explained that Rachel had hired him to investigate her husband, Andre. She suspected Andre of cheating, and Peter's investigation confirmed those suspicions. He met Rachel on October 10 to give her a report detailing Andre's affairs. Rachel was upset but determined to confront Andre, according to Peter. The detectives pressed Peter about his methods. He confessed to sometimes bending the rules to get information, raising concerns about the reliability of his findings. They discovered that Peter had fabricated some of his reports to take more money from Rachel. Business had been slow for him, and he saw an opportunity to make extra cash. He insisted that he never thought it would harm anyone, and that he never imagined Rachel would go missing. Despite his questionable ethics, Peter maintained his innocence regarding Rachel's disappearance. He stated that he only wanted to help her and had nothing to do with her vanishing. The detectives noted his mix of confidence and anxiety as he provided detailed accounts of his work. His financial motives and fabricated reports, however, made him a significant suspect. Local media, including ABC7 Denver and the Boulder Daily Camera, closely followed the developments. The community was eager for answers, and Peter's involvement added another layer of complexity to the case. The detectives continued to investigate his actions, hoping to uncover more clues. Peter's life was under intense scrutiny. He faced public suspicion and pressure to prove his innocence. Despite his denials, his unethical practices and financial motives were troubling. The investigation into Rachel Calden's disappearance was still ongoing, and each new lead brought the detectives closer to the truth. The identity of Rachel Calden's murderer remains unresolved, but significant suspicion fell on Andre Calden. Andre, 39, was a real estate agent who had been struggling due to the housing market crash. He was known for being charming but have a short temper and a reputation for being controlling. Financial stress and marital problems, combined with a secret life insurance policy on Rachel, provided a strong motive. On October 25, 2010, a crucial breakthrough came when the detectives discovered the hidden life insurance policy Andre had taken out on Rachel, worth a substantial amount. This policy, activated just weeks before Rachel's disappearance, had been hidden from her. Jessica Castian, feeling guilt-ridden, admitted to knowing about the policy but denied any involvement in the murder. The Boulder Police Department moved quickly to arrest Andre. It was a chilly, overcast day with temperatures in the low 50s. Detectives Olena Sev and Mark Taco led the arrest, arriving at Andre's home early in the morning. The community was tense, with local media closely following the events. Andre was arrested without incident. He appeared surprised but remained composed during the arrest. He was charged with murder, and the news spread rapidly throughout Boulder. Rachel's family expressed relief that a key suspect was in custody but remained anxious for justice. As Andre was taken into custody, the police continued to gather evidence. They focused on the financial motive, including the life insurance policy and the money Andre had stolen from Rachel to fund Jessica's yoga studio. The detectives believed Andre had planned Rachel's disappearance to solve his financial problems and start a new life with Jessica. The case against Andre was strong, but not airtight. The lack of Rachel's body and concrete physical evidence made it challenging. Nevertheless, the detectives were determined to pursue justice. Andre's arrest brought mixed reactions. Some believed he was guilty, while others felt the evidence was circumstantial. Rachel's family and friends were devastated by the entire ordeal. They hoped for a resolution. The Boulder community remained on edge as the legal process unfolded. Andre's behavior and financial troubles painted a compelling picture, but the case was far from closed. The detectives continued their work, searching for more evidence and following every lead. The trial of Andre Calden began on November 15, 2012. The courtroom was packed with local residents, reporters from ABC7 Denver, and journalists from the Boulder Daily Camera. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Julia Terrell, a seasoned prosecutor known for her tough stance on crime. She was 45 years old, sharp, and determined to get justice for Rachel. Terrell laid out the prosecution's case, focusing on Andre's financial troubles, his affair with Jessica Castian, and the secret life insurance policy he had taken out on Rachel. She argued that Andre had the motive, opportunity, and financial desperation to plan Rachel's disappearance and murder. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence shows that Andre Calden stood to gain a substantial amount of money from Rachel's death. He was in financial ruin and saw this as his way out, Terrell stated firmly in her opening argument. The defense was handled by Hans Stomias, a 50-year-old defense attorney known for his calm demeanor and meticulous approach. Tomias argued that the evidence against Andre was circumstantial. He pointed out the lack of a body and direct physical evidence linking Andre to Rachel's disappearance. Rachel's family watched the trial with heavy hearts. Her sister, Emily, was often seen in the courtroom, holding back tears. The community was divided, with some supporting the prosecution's narrative and others doubting the strength of the evidence. After 2 weeks of intense testimony and careful examination, the jury deliberated. On November 29, 2012, they returned with a verdict. Andre Colden was found not guilty due to insufficient evidence. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, followed by a mix of gasps and murmurs from the audience. Rachel's family was devastated by the verdict. They felt justice had not been served. Emily Tarot, the prosecutor, expressed her disappointment but respected the jury's decision. Andre's reaction to the verdict was subdued. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial and expressed relief at the outcome. However, he knew that public suspicion would linger. The verdict had a profound impact on Rachel's family and friends. They struggled with the outcome, feeling that Rachel's memory had not been honored. The community, too, was left with lingering doubts and unresolved questions. The trial's conclusion did little to alleviate the pain and uncertainty surrounding Rachel's disappearance. For many, it was a reminder of the complexities of the justice system and the challenges of finding the truth. The case remained open, and the search for answers continued. After the trial, the lives of those involved in Rachel Colden's case took different paths. Andre Colden, found not guilty, struggled to rebuild his life. The community of Boulder remained suspicious of him. He tried to continue his career in real estate, but faced significant obstacles. His reputation was tarnished, and clients were wary. Andre eventually moved away from Boulder, seeking a fresh start in Canada, his home country. Jessica Castian, the yoga instructor and Andre's secret lover, also faced a challenging aftermath. The revelation of her affair with Andre and her involvement in the scandal affected her professional life. Her yoga studio, which had been funded by money stolen from Rachel, lost many clients. Jessica publicly apologized and tried to distance herself from the controversy. She continued teaching yoga, but on a much smaller scale. Peter Elio, the private investigator, was under scrutiny for his unethical practices. His reputation in the investigative community was damaged beyond repair. He faced legal consequences for falsifying reports and defrauding Rachel. Peter struggled to find work and eventually left the profession. The public and media coverage of his involvement in the case made it difficult for him to regain trust. Rachel's family, particularly her sister Luana, continued to seek answers and justice. Emily became a vocal advocate for missing persons and victims of unsolved crimes. She worked closely with local organizations, raising awareness and pushing for continued investigation into her sister's disappearance. The emotional toll on Rachel's children was immense. They received counseling and support from family and community members. The Boulder community, marked by the tragedy, rallied around Rachel's family. Local events, like the annual Rachel Colden Memorial Hike, were organized to honor her memory and support efforts to find the truth. The case was a reminder of the importance of community solidarity and support. As time passed, the story of Rachel Colden continued to be a significant part of Boulder's history. The hope for justice and answers persisted, driven by the unwavering dedication of Rachel's family, the detectives, and the community. Claire Herskowitz was a 40-year-old woman who lived in Boca Raton, Florida. She was a stay-at-home mom and a part-time internet marketer. Claire was known for her lively personality and strong commitment to her family. She had a husband named David, who was 45, and 2 children, Greed, 12, and Block 9. Claire was very close to her family and friends and had built a successful career working from home, helping small businesses improve their online presence. She was good at what she did and enjoyed helping others succeed. Her work was featured on local business websites and in the Boca Raton Tribune. Claire's husband, David, owned a fishing tour company. To the outside world, he seemed like a devoted husband and father. However, as we will discover later, David had many secrets. Claire was very active in her community. She volunteered at Green and Block School, Pinecrest School, and was part of the PTA. She helped organize school events and fundraisers. She also loved to bake and often brought cookies and cakes to school events and community gatherings. In the days before her death, Claire was busy planning a family vacation to Disney World. She was looking forward to spending quality time with her family. Claire also had dreams of expanding her internet marketing business. She was working on a new project for a local restaurant and was excited about the possibilities it brought. Claire's life seemed perfect to many. She had a loving family, a successful career, and was well-liked in her community. However, everything changed in March 2016 when she discovered a dark secret about her husband's double life. This discovery would lead to her tragic and untimely death. On the morning of March 18, 2016, at around 8 o'clock a.m., Mark Stevens, Claire Herskowitz's next-door neighbor, made a shocking discovery. Mark, a retired police officer, was out for his usual morning walk when he noticed something strange at the Herskowitz house. The garage door was partially open, which was unusual for the typically tidy and cautious Claire. Curious and concerned, Mark approached the garage. As he got closer, he saw a pool of blood on the floor. His heart raced as he peered inside. There, lying motionless on the cold concrete, was Claire. She had been brutally attacked, her body covered in blood. Mark's years of police training kicked in. He quickly assessed the scene, noting the tire iron near Claire's body, which was likely the murder weapon. Mark immediately called 911, his voice steady but filled with urgency. He then waited outside the garage to ensure nothing was disturbed, keeping a watchful eye on the scene until the authorities arrived. The sound of sirens filled the air as the Boca Raton Police Department rushed to the scene. The garage was a gruesome sight. Blood splatters covered the floor and walls, evidence of a violent struggle. Claire's body showed signs of a brutal attack, with multiple wounds suggesting she had fought hard against her attacker. The detectives carefully documented the scene, taking photographs and collecting evidence. They noted the position of the tire iron and took swabs for DNA testing. As they worked, neighbors began to gather outside, whispering in shock and disbelief. The news of Claire's death spread quickly through the community, leaving everyone stunned. The detectives interviewed Mark Stevens, who described his discovery of the body. His calm and detailed account helped them piece together the initial timeline of the crime. Inside the house, Claire's children were still asleep, unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded just outside their door. The detectives made sure the children were taken to a safe place and arranged for them to stay with family members. As the investigation began, the community of Boca Raton was left reeling from the loss of a beloved mother and friend. When the Boca Raton Police Department arrived at the scene, it was around 8:15 a.m. on March 18, 2016. The team, led by Detectives Sarah Pallett and Yandy Ruse, quickly got to work. Detective Pallett, known for her meticulous attention to detail, and Detective Ruse, with his sharp instincts, were determined to solve the case swiftly. The garage where Claire Herskowitz's body was found was a gruesome sight. Blood splatters covered the walls and floor, indicating a violent struggle. Claire had been bludgeoned to death with a tire iron, which lay nearby, covered in blood. The scene suggested a sudden and brutal attack, with no signs of a break-in, pointing to someone she knew. The detectives first secured the area, ensuring no one could contaminate the crime scene. They documented everything with photographs and detailed notes. Forensic specialists arrived and began collecting evidence, including the tire iron, fingerprints, and DNA samples. They also took swabs from various surfaces to look for any other traces of the attacker. Detective Pallett noted the chaos in the garage, a spilled toolbox, scattered papers, and a broken family photo. These details were crucial as they painted a picture of the struggle Claire endured. The detectives also found Claire's cell phone, which they hoped would provide more clues about her final moments. As the investigation continued, the detectives moved inside the house. They checked the home for any additional evidence or signs of forced entry but found none. This reinforced their belief that Claire knew her attacker. Detectives Pallett and Ruse interviewed the neighbors, including Mark Stevens, who had discovered the body. Mark provided a detailed account of his morning routine and how he stumbled upon the horrific scene. His calm demeanor and clear observations were invaluable to the investigation. The detectives also spoke with Claire's children, Greed and Black, in a gentle manner, ensuring they felt safe. The kids were taken to a relative's house, away from the traumatic environment. Detectives reached out to David Herskowitz, Claire's husband, who was at his office. His reaction was notably composed, which raised some initial suspicions. Detective Pallett and Ruse reviewed security footage from nearby homes. They hoped to find any clues or suspicious activity around the time of the murder. They also planned to analyze Claire's phone records and social media for any unusual interactions or threats. As the day progressed, the detectives remained focused and determined. They knew solving Claire Herskowitz's murder was critical for the grieving family and the shocked community of Boca Raton. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, was vital in their quest for justice. The first suspect in Claire Herskowitz's murder was her husband, David Herskowitz. At 45 years old, David owned a fishing tour company in Boca Raton. Everyone who knew him, David seemed like a devoted husband and father. He was meticulous, introverted, and kept his personal life private from everyone, including his family. However, as detectives began to dig deeper, they discovered that David had been hiding a lot from them. David had been having an affair and was also in deep financial trouble. His fishing tour company, which seemed successful on the surface, was struggling. He had taken out several loans and was facing mounting debts. These secrets painted a different picture of the man who seemed so dedicated to his family. Detectives Pallet and Ruiz brought David in for questioning on the afternoon of March 18, 2016. David appeared calm, but his demeanor was detached. He denied any involvement in Claire's death and claimed he was at his office during the time of the murder. However, his calmness seemed suspicious to the detectives, considering the brutal nature of the crime and the loss of his wife. David's alibi was weak. He said he was alone in his office working on paperwork. He couldn't provide any solid evidence to support his whereabouts. Detectives Pallet and Ruiz pressed him about his affair and financial issues. David admitted to the affair but insisted it had nothing to do with Claire's murder. He became slightly agitated when discussing his financial problems but maintained his innocence throughout the interrogation. The detectives also looked into David's phone records and emails. They found numerous calls and messages between him and his mistress, Jennifer Green, coincidentally Claire's best friend. This connection added another layer to the investigation and gave the detectives more questions about David's possible motives. Neighbors and friends were interviewed, and many were shocked to hear about David's double life. They described him as quiet and reserved, a stark contrast to Claire's outgoing personality. Some neighbors mentioned seeing David act nervously in recent weeks, which raised more red flags. The detectives knew they needed more evidence to either implicate or clear David. They continued to analyze his financial records, hoping to find a link to the crime. They also planned to question Jennifer Green to see if she knew anything more about David's potential involvement in Claire's murder. As the investigation progressed, David Herskowitz remained a key suspect. His secrets and strange behavior kept the detectives on high alert, knowing that unraveling his story was crucial to solving the case. The second suspect in the investigation was Jennifer Green, Claire Herskowitz's best friend and colleague. Jennifer was 45 years old, ambitious, and known for her competitive nature. She had been working with Claire on various internet marketing projects and had shared many personal details about her life with her. Little did Claire know Jennifer was also having an affair with her husband David Herskowitz, a fact that put her under intense scrutiny. Jennifer and Claire had been close friends for years, sharing not only professional interests but also personal struggles. Jennifer had confided in Claire about her troubled marriage, which had created a bond between them. However, the revelation of her affair with David suggested a more complicated relationship, potentially filled with jealousy and rivalry. On March 19, 2016, detectives Pallet and Ruiz brought Jennifer in for questioning. Jennifer was visibly shaken but cooperative. She admitted to the affair with David but claimed she had nothing to do with Claire's murder. She described her relationship with Claire as mostly supportive but acknowledged moments of tension, especially when discussing their respective marriages. Jennifer's motive could stem from several factors. Her affair with David was a significant betrayal of Claire's trust, and if Claire had discovered it, it could have led to intense conflict. Additionally, Jennifer's ambitious nature and desire for success could have led to envy and resentment. During the interrogation, Jennifer was defensive but not overly aggressive. She answered the detectives' questions but was careful with her words. She gloated to police that David had told her he was planning to leave Claire and that their relationship would soon become official. This added another layer to the investigation, as it suggested Jennifer might have felt threatened by Claire's presence in David's life. Detectives Pallet and Ruiz also examined Jennifer's phone records and emails. They found numerous messages between her and David discussing both personal and professional matters. Some messages hinted of their plans for the future, further complicating the case. Friends and colleagues of Jennifer were interviewed, and many expressed shock at her involvement with David. They described Jennifer as driven and focused on her career, but were surprised to learn about the affair. Some mentioned that Jennifer had seemed more stressed and secretive in recent months. The detectives knew that while Jennifer's affair with David was significant, it did not directly link her to Claire's murder. They continued to gather evidence, hoping to uncover more about her role in the events leading up to Claire's death. Jennifer's actions and motives remained a critical piece of the puzzle, keeping her firmly in the spotlight of the investigation. On March 21, 2016, at around 3:00 p.m., the Boca Raton Police Department received a breakthrough in the case. The weather was clear and warm, typical for Florida. Detective Sarah Pallett was at the station when a forensic analyst named Lisa Kiang called with urgent news. They had found new evidence that could significantly impact the investigation. The evidence was discovered during a detailed analysis of Claire Herskowitz's cell phone. Forensic experts recovered deleted text messages between Claire and an unknown number. The messages revealed that Claire had discovered a shocking secret. Her husband David was running secret gambling and sex trafficking operation. Claire had planned to go to the police with this information, a motive for her murder. David's fishing tour company was actually a cover for a secret gambling and sex trafficking operations, a sort of brothel casino on a yacht. There, David would entertain his rich male clients with roulettes, slots, and young men and women, mostly from Eastern Europe who were lured to America by being told by David they would be working as fashion models. Detectives Pallett and Ruse immediately recognized the importance of this new evidence. They quickly called a team meeting to discuss the findings. The messages were explicit, detailing Claire's shock and determination to expose David's illegal activities. This information provided a clear motive for David to silence Claire. The detectives reviewed the messages and noted the dates and times. Claire had discovered the operation just days before her murder. The urgency in her messages indicated she was afraid and felt a pressing need to act quickly. This revelation added a new layer of complexity to the case and strengthened the suspicion against David. Detectives Pallett and Ruiz also noted that some messages mentioned a woman named Olga Vereskova. Claire had been in contact with Olga, who had traveled from Chelyabinsk, Russia, to confront David about her missing daughter, Anastasia. Anastasia had been lured to America with promises of a modeling career but ended up trapped in David's trafficking operation. The police also intensified their efforts to track down David's financial records and communications. They hoped to uncover more evidence that could tie him directly to both the trafficking operation and Claire's murder. The detectives reached out to federal agencies for assistance, knowing the case had now expanded beyond the simple domestic incident. As the investigation continued, the new evidence gave the detectives a clearer picture of the motive behind Claire's murder. David's secret life and illegal activities were at the heart of the case. The detectives remained focused and determined, knowing that uncovering the full extent of David's operations was key to solving Claire's murder and bringing justice to her family. The third suspect in the investigation was Olga Vereskova. Olga was 61 years old and had traveled all the way from Chelyabinsk, Russia, to find out what had happened to her daughter, Anastasia. Anastasia was just 18 when she came to America, believing she would be working as a fashion model. Instead, she became a victim in David Herskowitz's secret gambling and sex trafficking operation. On March 22, 2016, Detectives Sarah Pallett and Yandy Ruse brought Olga in for questioning. Olga was visibly upset and determined to find justice for her daughter. She spoke through a translator, explaining how Anastasia had disappeared shortly after arriving in the United States. Olga had tried everything to find her daughter, even hiring private investigators, but all leads had pointed back to David Herskowitz. Olga described her daughter as bright, ambitious, and full of dreams. Anastasia had been excited about her modeling career and looked forward to a new life in America. When Anastasia stopped communicating, Olga knew something was terribly wrong. Her determination to find the truth had led her to sell everything to fly Florida and confront David directly. During the interrogation, Olga was emotional but composed. She recounted how she had met with Claire Herskowitz in the days leading up to Claire's murder. Claire had been sympathetic and promised to help Olga expose David's operation. This meeting had occurred just 2 days before Claire's death, making Olga a key witness. Olga's motive for wanting to confront David was clear. She wanted answers about her daughter's disappearance and was willing to do anything to get them. However, the detectives found no evidence linking Olga to Claire's murder. Her emotional state and detailed account of her search for Anastasia painted her as a grieving mother rather than a suspect. The detectives continued to press Olga for more information about David's operations. Olga revealed that she had gathered documents and records about David's illegal activities, hoping to use them to pressure him into revealing Anastasia's whereabouts. She handed over these documents to the detectives, providing crucial evidence to further their investigation. Friends and acquaintances of Olga in Russia described her as a determined and caring mother. They said she was relentless in her search for Anastasia and had exhausted all resources to find her. Her journey to America was her last hope to uncover the truth. With all of his testimony and the documents she provided, Detectives Pallett and Ruiz had more evidence to connect David to both the trafficking operation and Claire's murder. Pulvi's involvement highlighted the international scope of David's crimes and the far-reaching impact of his actions. As the investigation progressed, Olga remained a crucial part of the case. Her unwavering determination to find justice for her daughter and her cooperation with the detectives brought them closer to uncovering the full extent of David's criminal activities. On March 24, 2016, after piecing together all the evidence, the Boca Raton Police Department identified David Herskowitz as Claire's murderer. David, 45, owned a fishing tour company, but his seemingly perfect life hid a dark secret. His operation was a cover for illegal gambling and sex trafficking. David's motive for killing Claire was clear. Claire had discovered his secret life and planned to expose him to the authorities. Fearing the collapse of his personal and professional life, David decided to silence her permanently. The police gathered enough evidence to arrest David, including his phone records, financial documents, and the deleted text messages between him and Claire. At 10:00 a.m., Detectives Sarah Pallett and Yandy Ruiz arrived at David's office. The atmosphere was tense as they approached. David was in a meeting, discussing his business plans, when the detectives entered. They calmly informed David of his arrest. David's reaction was a mix of shock and resignation. He didn't resist but maintained his innocence, claiming that he was being framed. The detectives handcuffed David and read him his rights. They then escorted him out of the building, where a crowd of curious onlookers and media had already gathered. News of the arrest spread quickly through the community, leaving everyone in disbelief. Claire's family was devastated but relieved that the police had finally identified her killer. The community of Boca Raton shared their pain, mourning the loss of a beloved mother and friend. The police continued their investigation to ensure they have a solid case against David. They uncovered more details about his illegal activities, linking him to the gambling and sex trafficking operation. The evidence painted a clear picture of a man desperate to protect his double life, willing to go to any lengths to keep his secrets hidden. David's arrest was a significant step towards justice for Claire. It also brought hope to Olga Vereskova, who still sought answers about her daughter Anastasia. The police reassured Olga that they would continue to investigate David's criminal network, hoping to find more victims and bring them justice as well. As David was led away in a police car, the residents of Boca Raton hoped for a swift and fair trial. Claire's murder had rocked the community, but her courage in uncovering David's crimes inspired many. The detectives remained committed to seeing the case through, determined to honor Claire's memory by ensuring her killer faced the full extent of the law. The trial of David Herskowitz began on August 1, 2017 in Boca Raton. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Karen Whitfield, known for her tenacity and keen sense of justice. Karen, 38, had a reputation for being tough on crime and was determined to see David held accountable for Claire's murder as other illegal activities. The prosecution's argument centered on the mountain of evidence against David. Karen presented the deleted text messages between Claire and David, financial records showing his debts, and testimonies from various witnesses, including Claire's family and friends. The jury listened intently as Karen detailed how David's secret life led him to kill his wife to prevent her from exposing his illegal activities. On the defense side was attorney Richard Palmer, a 45-year-old known for his sharp legal mind and calm demeanor. Richard argued that David was being framed and that the evidence was circumstantial. He tried to cast doubt on the validity of the text messages and suggested that other individuals involved in David's illegal operations had more to gain from Claire's death. Throughout the trial, Claire's family was present, their faces etched with grief and determination. They watched every moment, hoping for justice. Michelle, Claire's sister, often wiped away tears as she listened to the details of her sister's last days and the brutality of her murder. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with both sides presenting compelling arguments. However, the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. On August 24, 2017, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict. David Herskowitz was found guilty of first-degree murder, illegal gambling, and sex trafficking. During the sentencing hearing, the judge condemned David's actions and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. Claire's family felt a sense of closure, knowing that David would spend the rest of his life behind bars, but the pain of losing Claire remained. The verdict had a profound impact on the community of Boca Raton. Many felt that justice had been served. But the case also highlighted the dark underbelly of illegal activities that could exist in seemingly quiet neighborhoods. It served as a reminder of the importance of vigilance and community support. For Claire's friends and family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful chapter. They found solace in the fact that Claire's courage to uncover the truth had not been in vain. The community rallied around them, offering support and remembering Claire as a loving mother, wife, and friend who stood up for what was right. The trial of David Herskowitz would be remembered as a case that brought a community together and shone a light on the hidden dangers within. Claire's legacy of bravery and justice continued to inspire those who knew her. After David Herskowitz was sentenced to life in prison on August 24, 2017, the lives of everyone involved in the case continued to unfold in significant ways. The trial had brought closure to the case, but it also left lasting impacts on the people affected. Claire Herskowitz's family received support from local counseling services and community groups, which helped them navigate their grief. The community of Boca Raton, shaken by the case, came together to support the Herskowitz family, organizing fundraisers and memorials in Claire's honor. Grieve and Block were placed in the care of their extended family. They continued to attend school at their local school, Calusa Elementary, where teachers and counselors provided extra support. The children struggled with the loss of their mother but were gradually adapting with the help of therapy and their supportive relatives. Olga Vereskova, who had traveled from Russia in search of her daughter, Anastasia, found some closure with David's conviction. Although Anastasia had not been found, Olga continued her efforts to raise awareness about human trafficking. She collaborated with organizations such as the Polaris Project and participated in speaking engagements to shed light on the issue. Her advocacy helped bring attention to similar cases and supported other families facing similar tragedies. Jennifer Green, who had been a suspect but was later cleared, faced a challenging road as well. The revelation of her affair with David and its connection to the murder had impacted her personal and professional life. She took a leave of absence from her job and eventually moved away from Boca Raton to start anew. Her former colleagues and friends offered support, though the affair and its consequences left a lasting mark on her reputation. The trial of David Herskowitz left a deep impact on Boca Raton. It highlighted the dangers of hidden criminal activities and the importance of community vigilance. Claire Herskowitz's bravery in uncovering David's secrets had led to his arrest and conviction, but the ripples of the case continued to affect many lives. As time passed, the community worked to heal and remember Claire for her courage and commitment to justice. Her story remained a powerful reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the ongoing fight against injustice. The tragic story of Claire Herskowitz serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of hidden lives and the devastating impact of secrets. Tom Princely, 52 years old, was the well-respected principal of Lexington Christian Academy, a small private school in the heart of Kentucky's affluent suburban neighborhoods. Known for his unwavering dedication to both his work and the community, Tom had a reputation for fairness, kindness, and a passion for education. His love for restoring historic homes was more than a hobby. It was a calling. Over the years, he had meticulously restored several of the area's grand old houses, breathing new life into the historic architecture of Lexington. Tom was married to his second wife, Olive Princely, after a bitter divorce from his first wife, whose criminal activities as a drug dealer selling prescription drugs to other soccer moms had brought shame and scandal to the family. Despite this rocky past, Tom had worked hard to rebuild his life, focusing on his two children from his first marriage, Martin, 21, and Bree, 18. However, Tom's professional success came at a personal cost. He was often absorbed in his work, spending long hours at the school and on restoration projects. This dedication made him a somewhat distant husband and father, leaving Olive feeling neglected and unloved. Yet beneath this busy exterior, Tom was unaware of the storm brewing within his own home. Olive, feeling increasingly bored and resentful of Tom's emotional distance, had started a secret affair with his son Martin. This illicit sexual relationship had grown into a dangerous obsession, leaving Olive down a dark path. In the days leading up to his death in early April 2017, the seemingly perfect life Tom had built was about to come crashing down, shattering the peace of the quiet neighborhood he had worked so hard to be a part of. On the morning of April 5, 2017, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Lexington, Kentucky, was shaken by a grim discovery. At around 7:30 a.m., Bree Princely, Tom's 18-year-old daughter, returned home after spending the night at a friend's house. Bree had been out late studying for a big exam at Henry Clay High School, where she was a senior, and had stayed over at her friend's place to avoid the early morning commute. As Bree walked into the living room of her family's historic home, she immediately sensed something was wrong. The room, usually spotless, was in disarray. A chair was knocked over, and there were papers scattered across the floor. Then her eyes fell on the most horrifying sight she had ever seen. Her father, Tom Princely, lying motionless on the floor near the fireplace. His head was covered in blood, and a heavy iron fireplace poker lay beside him, also stained with blood. Bree's heart raced as she froze in shock, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. After a few moments, she managed to pull out her phone and dial 911, her hands trembling as she tried to explain to the operator what had happened. The dispatcher, hearing the fear in Bree's voice, quickly sent emergency services to the scene. When the first responders arrived, Bree was standing outside the house, pale and shaking. She was in a state of shock, unable to speak coherently. The paramedics rushed inside, but quickly realized there was nothing they could do. Tom Princely was already dead. The scene was chaotic, with signs of a struggle, but it was the bloodied fireplace poker that told the story of how Tom had met his end. As Bree was gently guided into an ambulance for medical evaluation, the police began their investigation. The officers on the scene knew they were dealing with more than just a simple burglary gone wrong. The violence of the attack and the staged appearance of the crime scene immediately raised red flags. Bree's discovery of her father's body marked the beginning of a complex and shocking investigation that would soon uncover the dark secrets hidden within the Princely family. The Lexington Police Department arrived swiftly at the Princely residence after Bree's frantic 911 call. It was just after 8:00 a.m. on April 5, 2017, when officers pulled up to the stately historic home, nestled among the horse farms and tree-lined streets that characterized the affluent neighborhood. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns, but the peaceful scene outside sharply contrasted with the horror that awaited inside. Detective Frank Mullins, a seasoned investigator with over 15 years on the force, led the team. Known for sharp instincts and meticulous attention to detail, Mullins had seen her share of crime scenes, but something about this one felt off. As she entered the living room, the first thing that struck her was the amount of blood. Tom Princely's body lay near the fireplace, his head caved in by the heavy iron poker that now lay discarded beside him. The room was in disarray, with overturned furniture and papers strewn across the floor, but Mullins noticed that some things didn't add up. The scene appeared to be a botched robbery, with a missing laptop and a few scattered bills suggesting a possible motive. However, Mullins's experience told her that the scene was too staged, too perfect in its chaos. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, and nothing of real value, such as the expensive antique clock on the mantel or the flat-screen TV, had been taken. It was as if the killer wanted the police to believe it was a simple home invasion gone wrong. As the forensic team began their work, Mullins directed them to dust for fingerprints and search for any other evidence that might have been overlooked in the apparent struggle. They used luminol to check for blood that might have been cleaned up, and sure enough, traces were found leading from the living room to the bathroom, indicating that the killer had attempted to wash away some of the evidence. The medical examiner arrived shortly after and confirmed what Mullins already suspected. Tom Princely had been killed by blunt force trauma to the head. The force of the blows suggested a great deal of anger or desperation. Mullins knew this wasn't the work of a random burglar. This was personal. As the investigation continued, Mullins's suspicions grew. The crime scene was too carefully crafted, and the brutality of the attack pointed to someone with a deep-seated motive. The detectives on the scene exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the investigation was going to be anything but straightforward. The peaceful, upscale community of Lexington was about to be rocked by revelations that would expose the dark undercurrents lurking beneath its polished surface. Detectives turned their attention to Olive Princely, Tom's 40-year-old second wife, as their primary suspect in the murder of Tom Princely. Olive was a stay-at-home mother who had always been known for her polished appearance and social grace. She was often seen at local charity events and community gatherings in Lexington, Kentucky. However, beneath her composed exterior, Olive harbored deep insecurities and fears, particularly about her past. Raised in a poor household where food was not a constant, Olive had once worked as an exotic dancer, a fact she kept hidden because of the extremely strict and conservative values of the community she lived in. In Lexington, any hint of scandal could result in severe public backlash, including physical punishment such as whippings for perceived immoral behavior. Olive's fear of her secret being exposed was a significant factor in her life. But when Detective Frank Mullins first questioned Olive, she presented herself as a grieving widow. Her voice trembled as she recounted the events leading up to Tom's death. Olive claimed she had been upstairs sleeping off a bottle of Cabernet when the attack occurred, only discovering the scene when she heard Bree's shrill screams. Olive insisted she had no idea who could have done such a thing, repeatedly emphasizing how much she loved her husband and how shocked she was by his brutal murder. Despite Olive's seemingly genuine grief, Detective Mullins couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Olive's story was just a bit too rehearsed, and her tears seemed to appear on cue. When Mullins asked Olive about her relationship with Tom, Olive admitted they had their problems but insisted they were working through them. She described Tom as a distant husband, but said she had always supported him, even during the difficult times. However, as the police dug deeper, they began to uncover troubling details about Olive's life. A search of her phone records revealed frequent calls and sexually explicit text messages to Tom's 21-year-old son, Martin. The messages were more than flirtatious and were at times explicitly sexual, detailing their liaisons in graphic detail, raising suspicions that Olive and Martin were more than just family. When confronted with this evidence, Olive's demeanor shifted. She became defensive, insisting that the messages were harmless and that she was simply trying to support Martin through a rough patch. But the police weren't convinced. Olive's growing resentment toward Tom, coupled with her inappropriate relationship with Martin, provided a possible motive for murder. As the investigation continued, Olive's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The police started to view her not as a grieving widow, but as a prime suspect in Tom's murder. The more they learned about her, the more they believed that Olive was hiding something, and that her secret might be the key to solving the case. The second person the police turned their attention to was Martin Princely, Tom's 21-year-old son from his first marriage. Martin had recently moved back home after being expelled from Arizona State University for drunken behavior and making sexual threats toward female students. Despite his charm and good looks, which he had inherited from his father, Martin had a troubled history, perhaps influenced by his birth mother, who was a drug dealer. He struggled with finding direction in his life, bouncing from one failed class to another, and had a reputation for getting into trouble. Martin's relationship with his father was strained, with Tom often expressing disappointment in his son's lack of ambition and direction. When Detective Frank Mullins sat down to question Martin, he was cocky and dismissive. He admitted to the police that he had a bleeping complicated relationship with his father, but denied any involvement in Tom's murder. Martin described his father as a strict and often distant figure who freely spanked his kids and had always put work before family. He claimed that Tom's death, while tragic, didn't come as a shock given the stress his father had been under, and suggested it was a suicide. However, Martin's attitude changed when the police brought up his relationship with Olive. Initially, Martin tried to downplay it, claiming that his moo-moo mommy Olive had been supportive during his many rough patches, and was the only mother he had as his birth mother was in prison. But as the questioning continued, it became clear that the relationship was far from some cutesy-inspiring thing. Martin eventually broke down and admitted that he and Olive had been involved in a sexual relationship for several months. He shrugged it off as a casual fling, claiming he was in it for the, quote, free sex, and insisted it was no big deal. Despite Martin's nonchalant attitude, the police saw his relationship with Olive as a potential motive. If Tom had discovered the affair, it could have led to a confrontation, giving Martin a reason to want his father out of the picture. However, Martin maintained that he had nothing to do with Tom's death, and that the affair was just a distraction from his otherwise aimless life. Detective Mullins noted Martin's lack of genuine emotion when discussing his father's death. His cavalier attitude and refusal to take responsibility for his actions only raised more red flags. But without solid evidence linking him directly to the crime, the police couldn't arrest him yet. Still, Martin remained a person of interest, especially given the growing tension between him and Olive, and the volatile nature of their secret affair. The investigation into Tom's murder was far from over, and Martin's role in the case was becoming increasingly murky. The third person the police questioned was Bree Princely, Tom's 18-year-old daughter and Martin's younger sister. Bree had been the one to discover her father's body, and her initial shock had quickly turned into suspicion. She was convinced that Martin had something to do with their father's death. Bree and Martin had never been close, and their relationship had grown even more strained in recent months. Bree was a sharp, independent young woman, set to graduate from high school in just a few months. She was planning to attend the University of Kentucky in the fall, where she intended to study psychology. Unlike her brother, Bree had always been focused and driven, with a clear sense of what she wanted from life. When Detective Frank Mullins interviewed Bree, she found her to be articulate and composed, despite the trauma she had just experienced. Bree was adamant that Martin was involved in their father's murder. She described how Martin had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to Tom's death, frequently arguing with their father and spending more time at home than usual. Bree also mentioned the growing tension between Tom and Olive, though she hadn't been aware of the full extent of their marital problems. Bree's suspicions didn't stop at Martin. She also expressed concern about Olive's behavior, noting that her stepmother had seemed unusually calm in the aftermath of the murder. Bree described how Olive had taken control of the situation, calling the police and informing the neighbors before Bree had even processed what she had seen. To Bree, Olive's actions seemed too calculated, too rehearsed. As the investigation progressed, Bree's own relationship with Olive came under scrutiny. Olive had used her charm and manipulative tactics to exert control over Bree, creating quite the complicated situation. Despite being a victim in many ways, Bree was drawn into Olive's web of deceit. Eventually, Bree became involved in a brief sexual affair with Olive, a fact that came to light during her interviews with police. This relationship was part of Olive's broader attempt to manipulate those around her and maintain control before and after Tom's death. Bree's insights painted a troubling picture of the dynamics within the Princely household. The police began to consider the possibility that both Olive and Martin were involved in Tom's murder, perhaps working together to eliminate him. Bree's testimony added another layer of complexity to the case, suggesting that the murder was the result of a tangled web of family tensions and secret relationships. Despite her strong suspicions, Bree had no concrete evidence to prove Martin's or Olive's involvement. However, her observations provided the police with valuable leads, prompting them to dig deeper into the lives of both Martin and Olive. The investigation was becoming increasingly complicated, with Bree's testimony serving as a crucial piece of the puzzle. On the morning of April 18, 2017, the investigation into Tom Princely's murder took a crucial turn. The weather was unseasonably warm for early spring in Lexington, with clear skies and a light breeze. Detective Frank Mullins was back at the Princely residence, meticulously combing through the living room for anything the initial sweep might have missed. The case had stalled, with no solid evidence tying any of the suspects, Olive, Martin, or Bree, to the crime. But Mullins was determined to find the missing link. As she was about to call it a day, Mullins noticed something odd about the fireplace. The mantel was dusted clean, except for a small, almost imperceptible smear near the base. It was easy to overlook, but Mullins's keen eye caught it. She called in a forensic team to take a closer look. They carefully removed the fireplace poker, which had already been identified as the murder weapon, and began to dust the area for prints. What they found was a partial fingerprint, faint but legible, on the underside of the poker, something that had been missed in the initial investigation. The fingerprint was sent to the lab for analysis, and within hours they had a match. It wasn't Tom's, Olive's, or Martin's. It was Bree's. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Bree had been vocal about her suspicions of Martin and Olive, but now the evidence pointed to her. This new piece of evidence forced the police to reevaluate Bree's involvement in the case. Could she have been more involved than she let on? Detective Mullins was hesitant to jump to conclusions. Bree's prints on the poker could have been left there innocently after all. She lived in the house and could have handled the poker at any time. But the timing was suspicious. Why would Bree's fingerprints be on the murder weapon, especially in such an unusual spot? Mullins's team decided to bring Bree in for another round of questioning. This time, they pressed her harder about her actions on the day of the murder. Bree maintained her innocence, insisting she had nothing to do with her father's death. But her story had small inconsistencies, and the new evidence made it impossible to completely rule her out. As the investigation continued, the police knew they needed more than just a partial fingerprint to build a case. But the discovery had cracked the investigation wide open. Now, with Bree under increased scrutiny, the detectives were more determined than ever to piece together the truth behind Tom Princely's murder. On April 19, 2017, the investigation into Tom Princely's murder took a decisive turn. After the discovery of Bree's fingerprints on the fireplace poker, the police focused their attention back on Olive Princely, Tom's wife. Despite Bree's prints on the murder weapon, something about Olive's demeanor during questioning had never sat right with Detective Frank Mullins. Olive had been too calm, too rehearsed. And then there was the strange relationship with Martin, Tom's 21-year-old son, that kept coming up in interviews. The breakthrough came when police obtained Olive's phone records, which revealed a series of deleted text messages between Olive and Martin in the days leading up to Tom's death. The messages were flirtatious and hinted at a deeper, more troubling relationship. One message from Olive, sent just 2 days before the murder, read, "Soon, it'll just be us, and we can finally be free." Another from Martin, responding, said, "I can't wait. He's in the way." These messages provided a clear motive. Olive wanted to be with Martin, and Tom was the obstacle in their path. The detectives confronted Olive with the evidence. It was April 20, 2017, a bright and sunny afternoon, when Olive was brought into the Lexington Police Department for what would be her final interrogation. The once composed and graceful Olive began to crack under pressure. She denied any involvement at first, but eventually started to unravel as the questioning intensified. Detective Mullins pushed Olive on the inconsistencies in her story and the damning text messages. Olive's calm facade broke, and she began to cry. In a moment of desperation, she confessed, "I couldn't stand it anymore. Tom was suffocating me. I needed to be with Martin. We were meant to be together." Olive admitted to planning Tom's murder, staging it to look like a robbery gone wrong, and even trying to manipulate Bree into taking the fall by planting her fingerprints on the poker. With her confession, the police had everything they needed. Olive Princely, 40 years old, was arrested on the spot for the murder of her husband, Tom. The news of her arrest shocked the community, especially those who knew the Princely family. Tom's children, Bree and Martin, were devastated, with Martin refusing to believe his stepmother could be capable of such a heinous act, despite the evidence. The case had come full circle, and justice was finally within reach. Olive's arrest marked the end of a twisted love triangle that had destroyed a family and left a community in shock. The trial of Olive Princely began on October 15, 2017 in Lexington, Kentucky. The case drew considerable media attention due to the shocking nature of the crime and Olive's seemingly perfect public image. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious locals, and Tom Princely's grieving family. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Helen Morgenstern, a 45-year-old attorney known for her dedication and clear, compelling arguments. Morgenstern outlined Olive's motive in her opening statement, focusing on Olive's secret affair with Tom's son Martin and her desire to be free from Tom's control. Morgenstern detailed how Olive had meticulously planned the murder, staging the crime scene to look like a botched robbery. She emphasized the chilling text messages between Olive and Martin, which revealed their intentions and desire to be together. In contrast, Olive's defense attorney was Robert Hughes, a 52-year-old lawyer known for his calm and methodical approach. Hughes argued that Olive's confession was coerced and that there was insufficient evidence to prove her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. He painted Olive as a woman driven to extreme measures by an unhappy marriage and emotional turmoil. Hughes claimed Olive's confession was a result of the intense pressure from the police and her distressed state of mind. As the trial progressed, Tom's family watched with heavy hearts. Bree and Martin were visibly upset, struggling to come to terms with their stepmother's betrayal. Bree's face was often buried in her hands, while Martin appeared numb, still in disbelief that someone he had trusted could commit such a crime. On October 25, 2017, after several days of testimony and deliberations, the jury returned with a verdict. Olive Princely was found guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as Judge Richard Blake announced the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence was met with mixed emotions. Some felt it was a just punishment for her crimes, while others believed it was too harsh. Tom's family was relieved that justice had been served but remained deeply affected by the loss. The verdict marked the end of a tragic chapter for the Princely family, and Olive's conviction served as a stark reminder of the devastating impact of unchecked desires and deceit. After Olive Princely's conviction, the lives of everyone involved were profoundly changed. The trial's end did not bring an easy resolution for the people affected by Tom Princely's murder. Olive Princely was transferred to the Kentucky State Penitentiary, a maximum security facility known for housing dangerous criminals. Her once glamorous life had come to a stark and unglamorous end. Olive faced the harsh reality of prison life, with its daily routines and stringent rules. She had lost everything she held dear: her freedom, her marriage, and her reputation. Olive's case continued to be a topic of immediate interest, with many newspapers and news stations covering her transition from a community figure to a convicted murderer. Martin Princely struggled to cope with the fallout from the trial, but 21-year-old was left with the painful realization that his actions and relationship with Olive had contributed to a tragedy. He was also dealing with the stigma of being associated with such a high-profile case. Martin tried to move on by seeking counseling and focusing on rebuilding his life, though the shadow of the scandal followed him wherever he went. Ree Princely, Tom's 18-year-old daughter, faced her own set of challenges. The ordeal had taken a toll on her emotionally and psychologically. She was determined to honor her father's memory and avoid letting the tragedy define her. Ree chose to focus on her education and career, hoping that moving forward with her life would help her find some peace. She found solace in speaking out about her experience, participating in local events and discussions to raise awareness about domestic violence and familial betrayal. The Princely family's case remained a sobering reminder of how personal relationships and hidden grievances could lead to devastating consequences. As the months passed, the community began to heal, but the memory of Tom Princely and the impact of Olive's crime lingered as a cautionary tale about the dark side of human nature. Edith Edie Palmer Delamere was a 70-year-old woman who led a life that many would describe as anything but ordinary. Born in Zambia to British parents, Edie grew up surrounded by the wild beauty of Africa. She eventually moved to London, where she became a model during the swinging 60s, a time when the city was the epicenter of fashion and culture. Her modeling career brought her into contact with celebrities, artists, and the elite of society. But Edie wasn't content to stay in one place. She married 4 times, each marriage more extravagant than the last, before settling down in Boynton Beach, Florida, a sunny retirement community with an average age of 62 and known for its relaxed atmosphere. Edie was a wealthy divorcee with a reputation for being a bridezilla. She had a taste for the finer things in life, whether it was her collection of designer clothes, her flashy jewelry, or her love for Bentleys. Despite her age, Edie was obsessed with youth. She spent a small fortune on cosmetic procedures to maintain her appearance and often surrounded herself with younger people, particularly men who she would entertain sexually. Her vanity was well known in Boynton Beach, no small thing, where she was often seen in the area's many high-end boutiques and beauty salons. Edie had 1 child, Leila Palmer Delamere, but their relationship was strained at best. Edie's controlling nature and obsession with her looks made it difficult for Leila to connect with her mother. Leila had spent years living on her own, studying Zen Buddhism in Japan, far away from Edie's shadow. When they reconnected in late 2012, the reunion was rocky. Edie, who was planning her 5th wedding to a much younger man named Richard Rick Lasker, and was more focused on her upcoming nuptials than on mending her relationship with Leila, who she privately said was, quote, an ugly little pavlet. In the days leading up to her death, Edie was busy preparing for her wedding, which was to be a grand affair. She spent hours at the spa, getting treatments to ensure she looked her best, and shopped for the perfect wedding dress at high-end stores like Saks Fifth Avenue. But beneath the surface, Edie's life was far from perfect. Her obsession with youth and control over those around her had created deep rifts that, unknown to her, would end in her murder. On the morning of January 15, 2013, Boynton Beach was bathed in the warm glow of the Florida sun, a typical winter day for the quiet retirement community. But inside the upscale home of Edith Edie Palmer Delamere, something was terribly wrong. At around 9:30 a.m., Leila Palmer Delamere arrived at her mother's house, planning to discuss last-minute details for the upcoming wedding. When she entered the home, she immediately noticed how eerily quiet it was. No music playing from Edie's vintage record collection, no sounds of her bustling about. Leila felt a knot form in her stomach. Leila called out to her mother, but there was no response. Growing more anxious, she walked upstairs to Edie's lavish bedroom, a room filled with expensive furniture and walls adorned with photos from her glamorous past. What she found next was the stuff of nightmares. Edie was lying in her king-size bed, naked and lifeless. Her face, which had once been the picture of beauty and youth, was now a haunting sight. She had been shot, and in a gruesome twist, her eyes had been viciously poked out with a ballpoint pen. The shock hit Leila hard. She stood frozen, staring at the horrific scene. Then, in a panic, she grabbed her iPhone and dialed 911, her hands trembling as she struggled to explain what she had just discovered. What the bleep? My mother's bleeping dead. There's blood bleeping everywhere. Gross. Leila's voice was filled with terror and disbelief as she described the scene to the emergency operator. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the peaceful morning air of the neighborhood. Officers from the Boynton Beach Police Department quickly entered the home, securing the area and instructing Lila to wait outside. Paramedics were close behind, but it was clear there was nothing they could do. Edie was already gone. As Lila stood outside the house, trying to process what had just happened, neighbors began to gather, whispering among themselves, their faces a mix of shock and concern. In a community where the biggest news was usually a neighbor's new Ferrari or an upcoming all-night orgy, the discovery of a brutal murder was unimaginable. Lila was left to grapple with the horrifying reality that her mother was dead, and the question on everyone's mind was, who could have done something so terrible, so brutal? The Boynton Beach Police Department was quick to respond to the scene after Lila Palmer Delamere's frantic 911 call on the morning of January 15, 2013. Detective Gregor Harbinski, a seasoned investigator with over 2 decades of experience, led the team. Harbinski was known for his calm demeanor and sharp eye for detail, qualities that would prove essential in this grisly case. As they arrived at Edie Palmer Delamere's luxurious home, the officers were met with a scene of disturbing violence. The crime scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Edie's bedroom, once a place of opulence, was now the site of a brutal murder. The king-size bed, adorned with satin sheets, was soaked in blood. Edie's lifeless body lay in the center, naked, with a gunshot wound to her chest. But what shocked the officers most were her eyes, brutally poked out of her like a sunny-side-up egg with a ballpoint pen. The sheer brutality of the act pointed to a deep-seated rage, suggesting the killer harbored intense hatred toward Edie. Detective Harbinski and his team began their investigation with a thorough examination of the room. They carefully bagged and tagged evidence, including the blood-stained pen, which was still lying on the floor near the bed. The crime scene unit photographed the room from every angle, capturing the horror in vivid detail. The team also dusted for fingerprints, though the presence of Edie's many sexual visitors and household staff over the years made the task more challenging. Outside, Lila sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket provided by a neighbor, her eyes red from crying. Harbinski knew she would need to be questioned, but first, he wanted to ensure the crime scene was meticulously processed. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. The method of murder and the mutilation of the victim's eyes suggested that the killer was someone who knew Edie well, someone with a personal vendetta. Given the brutal nature of the crime, Detective Harbinski contacted the FBI to bring in a criminal profiler. Dr. Camila Kapoor, a renowned psychologist specializing in violent crimes, was called to assist. After reviewing the crime scene and speaking with Harbinski, Dr. Kapoor developed a psychological profile of the killer. She believed the murderer was likely someone close to Edie, possibly a family member or one of her many sexual partners. The killer was driven by jealousy, resentment, and an overwhelming need to assert control over Edie. The act of gouging out her eyes indicated a desire to erase Edie's gaze, perhaps stemming from feelings of inadequacy or a fear of judgment. Dr. Kapoor's profile added a new layer to the investigation. It suggested that the person responsible for this horrific act was not just a cold-blooded killer, but someone deeply disturbed with a complex emotional relationship to the victim. With this new insight, the police turned their attention to those closest to Edie, determined to uncover the identity of the murderer. The police quickly focused their investigation on Lila Palmer Delamere, Edie's estranged daughter. At 34 years old, Lila had spent much of her life living in the shadow of her glamorous and demanding mother. After returning from Japan, where she had been studying Zen Buddhism for several years, Lila had hoped to find some peace, but reconnecting with Edie only seemed to reopen old wounds. Their relationship was strained at best, with Edie constantly criticizing Lila for being ugly and not living up to her standards. Lila had been struggling financially since her return to the U.S. She lived in a modest apartment in West Palm Beach and worked part-time at a local yoga studio, earning just enough to get by. She was known to be quiet and reserved, often keeping to herself. But beneath that calm exterior, those who knew Lila sensed a deep sadness and frustration. Friends noted that Lila was increasingly anxious in the months leading up to her mother's death, and she often spoke about feeling trapped and powerless in her life. The police believed that Lila had a strong motive for wanting Edie out of her life. Years of emotional abuse and feeling overshadowed by her mother's larger-than-life personality could have driven Lila to the breaking point. Moreover, the discovery that her mother was having an affair with her much younger boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, would have been the ultimate betrayal. The police theorized that Leela might have seen the murder as her only way to escape Edie's control and humiliation. Detective Gregor Harbinski brought Leela in for questioning just 2 days after the murder. During the interrogation, Leela appeared nervous but composed. She denied any involvement in her mother's death, stating that she had been at home alone chanting sutras at the time of the murder. However, her alibi was weak, with no witnesses to confirm her whereabouts. The detectives pressed her on her relationship with Edie, particularly her feelings about the affair with Jake, but Leela remained tight-lipped, refusing to engage with their line of questioning. Leela's behavior during the interrogation raised red flags for the investigators. She seemed detached, almost cold, when discussing her mother's death, which they found unusual for someone who had just lost a parent. However, there was no physical evidence directly linking Leela to the crime, and despite their suspicions, the police knew they needed more to build a solid case against her. As the investigation continued, Leela remained a prime suspect, but the lack of concrete evidence meant that the police would have to keep digging. They hoped that further examination of the crime scene and interviews with other people in Edie's life would uncover the truth behind this brutal murder. The investigation into the murder of Edie Palmer Delamere next led the police to Jake DeCastro, an 18-year-old with quite the complicated life. Jake, an undocumented immigrant from Argentina, had been living in Boynton Beach for several months by January 2013. He worked odd jobs, including landscaping and dishwashing, earning just enough to get by. Despite his rough circumstances, Jake was known for his charm, particularly with women, and his good looks made him a local heartthrob among the area's many old and sexually frustrated rich women. Jake's relationship with Leela Palmer Delamere, Edie's daughter, was complex. Lila, 16 years older, had taken the vulnerable young Jake in, providing him with a place to stay, some money every now and then, and protection from immigration authorities. In return, Jake offered sex, although he saw the relationship as more transactional than romantic. Jake's dreams were modest. He wanted to build a stable life in America, perhaps save enough money to start his own stand selling empanadas by the beach one day. But his immigration status made everything uncertain. Edie Palmer Delamere's blatant sexual interest in Jake added another layer of tension. According to those who knew them, Edie had developed a lurid fascination with the young man. She was known for her attraction to hot younger men, and Jake was no exception. She had reportedly lavished him with gifts, including Rolex watches and an Armani suit, and had hinted at a future together if he dumped her daughter for her. For Jake, this was a tempting offer. Edie was much wealthier than Leela, and a relationship with her could mean a life he had never imagined, and perhaps even that empanada stand. When the police brought Jake in for questioning, they found him nervous and evasive. He avoided direct answers, often shifting the conversation away from his relationship with Leela. He did, however, admit to having a sexual relationship with Edie, but claimed it was purely physical, and that he had never had any love for her, intended to pursue her as long as she would give him things. Jake insisted that he had been with friends on the night of the murder, drinking at a local cantina, but his alibi was weak, with no one able to confirm his whereabouts for the entire evening. The detectives were suspicious of Jake's motives. They knew he had a lot to gain from Edie's death, especially if she had promised him a share of her substantial wealth. But as they pressed him further, Jake remained calm, though clearly uncomfortable. He denied any involvement in Edie's murder, repeatedly stating that he had no reason to harm her. The police, however, weren't convinced. They believed Jake might have been desperate enough to commit the crime, hoping to secure a future that had always seemed out of reach. Despite their suspicions, the police couldn't find any physical evidence linking Jake to the murder. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses placing him at the scene. Jake DeCastro remained a person of interest. But without more concrete evidence, the investigators knew they needed to look elsewhere for answers. The investigation into Edie Palmer Delamere's murder also pointed the police toward Rick Lasker, Edie's 45-year-old fiancé. Rick was a local businessman who had met Edie at a charity event in late 2012. Their whirlwind romance quickly led to an engagement, despite their significant 25-year age difference. Friends and neighbors in Boynton Beach described Rick as a man with a charming exterior, but those who knew him better often spoke of his quick temper and financial troubles. Rick had been struggling to keep his business afloat. He owned a small chain of used car dealerships across South Florida, but by January 2013, the business was bleeding money. The recession that had rocked the U.S. economy a few years earlier still had lingering effects, and Rick was desperate for a financial lifeline. When he met Edie, a wealthy widow with a substantial savings and an insatiable sexual hunger for men, it seemed like his problems were over. But their relationship was far from smooth. Despite planning a wedding, Rick and Edie had a contentious relationship. Edie was known for her controlling behavior, often treating Rick more like an employee or sex slave than a partner. The couple frequently argued, especially over the prenuptial agreement Edie insisted on. She wanted to protect her fortune, while Rick, already drowning in debt, saw the prenup as a potential barrier to financial security. Their disagreements became so intense that neighbors reported hearing shouting matches from Edie's home in the days leading up to her death. When the police brought Rick in for questioning, he appeared calm but guarded. He denied any involvement in Edie's murder, claiming that despite their arguments, he genuinely loved her. Rick provided an alibi for the night of the murder, stating that he had been entertaining potential business partners at a strip club in Miami. However, when detectives checked his alibi, they found inconsistencies. The meeting he mentioned was real, but it had ended hours before Edie was killed, leaving a significant gap in Rick's timeline. The police were particularly interested in Rick's potential motive. Edie's wealth was a powerful incentive, especially given Rick's financial woes. If she had died before the wedding, Rick stood to gain nothing due to the prenup. But if he could somehow make her death look like an accident or orchestrate it in a way that benefited him, Rick could walk away with a substantial inheritance. As detectives pressed Rick on these points, his calm demeanor began to crack. He became defensive, insisting that his financial problems were under control and that he had no reason to harm Edie. But the police weren't convinced. They knew Rick had a lot to lose if the marriage didn't go through, and they suspected he might have been willing to take drastic measures to secure his future. Despite their suspicions, the police didn't have enough evidence to charge Rick with the murder. However, his shaky alibi and financial motives kept him firmly in their sights as they continued the investigation. On the morning of January 24, 2013, Boynton Beach was experiencing one of its rare chilly days, with temperatures dipping into the 50s. It was during this unusual cold spell that a significant breakthrough occurred in the investigation of Edie Palmer Delamere's murder. Detective Karen Martins, who had been tirelessly combing through Edie's personal effects, discovered something unusual in Edie's bedside drawer, a torn piece of a handwritten note. The note was crumpled and shoved to the back, as if someone had tried to dispose of it in haste. The note, though incomplete, contained a few lines that caught the detective's attention. The handwriting matched Edie's, and the content hinted at a heated argument. The remaining legible words included Rick, betrayal, will, and an expletive. These fragments suggested that Edie might have been in the process of altering her will or had discovered something unsettling about her fiancé, Rick Lasker. The discovery of this note added a new dimension to the investigation, reinforcing suspicions that the motive for Edie's murder was financial. With this new evidence in hand, the police revisited Rick Lasker's financial records and discovered that he had recently made a large purchase, an expensive engagement ring that he had claimed was a gift for Edie. However, the timing of the purchase was suspicious. Rick had bought the ring just days before Edie's death, despite his well-known financial troubles. This raised the question, was Rick trying to appease Edie, or was it part of a larger plan to manipulate her before her death? The detectives also decided to send the torn note to the lab for further analysis. They wanted to see if they could recover any additional writing on the missing portion, which could provide more insight into Edie's state of mind or her intentions regarding her will. Additionally, they requested a forensic examination of the handwriting to confirm that the note was indeed written by Edie and not forged by someone else. The discovery of the note and the questionable ring purchase put Rick back under intense scrutiny. The police were now more convinced than ever that Rick had something to hide. They increased their surveillance on him, hoping to catch any slip-up that might lead to a confession or more concrete evidence. As the investigation deepened, the police continued to piece together the puzzle, knowing that time was running out to solve the case before it grew cold. The torn note and the engagement ring were pivotal in pushing the investigation forward, but the detectives knew they still needed more to definitively connect Rick to Edie's murder. On the evening of January 30, 2013, as Boynton Beach residents bundled up against the unseasonably cold weather, the police made a crucial breakthrough in the case. After weeks of intense investigation, they had finally gathered enough evidence to identify Edith Edie Palmer Delamere's murderer, her own daughter, Leila Palmer Delamere. Leila, a 34-year-old woman with a troubled past, had always lived in the shadow of her flamboyant and domineering mother. The investigation revealed that Leila had been struggling with deep-seated resentment toward Edie for years. But it wasn't until she discovered her boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, was cheating on her with her own mother that her jealousy and rage reached a fatal boiling point. The police uncovered that Leila had purchased a .38 caliber revolver just days before her mother's death. This fact, combined with the forensic evidence, ballistic tests that matched the bullets found at the crime scene to the revolver, provided the police with the critical link they needed. Furthermore, detectives found Leila's fingerprints on the ballpoint pen used to mutilate Edie's eyes, a detail that revealed the deep hatred she harbored. On the night of Edie's murder, Leila confronted her mother about the affair. Enraged and feeling utterly betrayed, she shot Edie while she was naked in bed, then proceeded to desecrate her body in a fit of blind fury. Her motive was clear. Leila wanted to punish her mother for the ultimate betrayal and eliminate the woman who had overshadowed her entire life. The police arrested Leila at her modest apartment in West Palm Beach. When the officers arrived, she was calm, almost resigned, as if she had been expecting them. She offered no resistance and simply stated, "You bleeping got me." Her reaction was devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the viciousness of her crime. Leila's arrest sent shockwaves through the local community. Edie's fiancé, Rick Lasker, who had initially been under suspicion, expressed his relief but was devastated by the betrayal within the family. Friends and neighbors of Edie, who had once admired her for her larger-than-life personality, were stunned to learn that her own daughter was behind the brutal killing. As Leila was led away in handcuffs, the case that had gripped Boynton Beach was one step closer to being resolved. But for those who knew Edie, the tragedy of her murder at the hands of her own flesh and blood would leave a lasting scar on the community. Leila Palmer Delamere's trial for the murder of her mother, Edith Edie Palmer Delamere, began on July 15, 2013, at the Palm Beach County Courthouse. The trial quickly became the talk of Boynton Beach, with locals following the proceedings closely, eager to see justice served. The prosecution was led by Assistant State Attorney Jennifer Wright-Ponzar, a seasoned prosecutor known for her tough, no-nonsense approach in the courtroom. Wright-Ponzar argued that Leila had coldly and deliberately planned her mother's murder out of deep-seated jealousy and anger. She highlighted the evidence, including the revolver Leila had purchased and the forensic proof linking her to the crime. Wright emphasized how Leila's resentment had been festering for years, culminating in this tragic act of violence. On the other side, Leila's defense attorney, Paul Adams, a well-known public defender in South Florida, painted a different picture. He argued that Leila's mental state had been severely compromised at the time of the murder, driven by years of emotional abuse and manipulation by her mother. Adams suggested that Leila was pushed to the brink, acting in a moment of uncontrollable rage rather than premeditated malice. He called expert witnesses to testify about Leila's history of depression and anxiety, which had worsened after discovering her boyfriend's affair with Edie. Throughout the trial, Edie's friends and former acquaintances filled the courtroom, watching with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. Some had known Edie as a vibrant, if sometimes difficult, personality, and they struggled to reconcile the image of the glamorous socialite with the brutal crime. On August 2, 2013, after just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Leila to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Leila remained expressionless, while her former boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, who had testified during the trial, looked on with visible relief. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the case, but opinions were divided. Some in Boynton Beach felt that justice had been served, while others believed that Leila's life sentence was too harsh, given the circumstances of her mental health and the toxic relationship with her mother. For Edie's friends and family, the trial's outcome was bittersweet, a reminder of the deep wounds left by the crime. After the trial, life in Boynton Beach slowly returned to normal, but the shadows of Edith Edie Palmer Delamere's murder lingered. Leila Palmer Delamere began serving her life sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Reports indicated that Leila struggled to adjust to prison life, grappling with depression and isolation. Despite her legal team's efforts to appeal the sentence, there was little hope for Leila's release. Jake DeCastro, Leila's former boyfriend, tried to move on with his life. He left Boynton Beach and returned to Argentina, where he started over, away from the scandal that had consumed his life in Florida. In Argentina, Jake kept a low profile, working various odd jobs to make ends meet, far from the wealth and comfort he had sought during his affair with Edie. Rick Lasker, Edie's former fiancé, also tried to rebuild his life. The death of Edie and the subsequent trial had left him financially drained, and he was forced to sell the lavish Boynton Beach home they had planned to share. He moved to a smaller condo in Delray Beach, where he lived a quieter, more subdued life. Rick distanced himself from the social scene that he and Edie had once dominated, becoming something of a recluse. For Edie's friends and acquaintances, the glamorous parties and social gatherings of the past were a distant memory. Her death had cast a long shadow over Boynton Beach's elite circles, and many who had once been close to her found themselves reevaluating their own lives and relationships, seeking to avoid the kind of tragic ending that had befallen Edie and Leah. Leah Brewster was a 40-year-old woman known for her creative talents and big heart. She lived in a cozy house in a friendly neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Leah worked as an interior designer, using her keen eye for detail to transform homes and businesses into beautiful spaces. She had a degree in interior design from the University of Texas at Austin, where she was an active member of the Student Art Society. Leah was not just talented, she was also very caring. She often volunteered at local shelters like the Austin Animal Center and organized community events. For instance, she was a key figure in setting up the annual spring fair at the local park, where families enjoyed food, games, and live music. Her friends described her as the heart of their group, always the one to plan get-togethers and make everyone feel welcome. She had a close-knit group of friends who often met up for brunch at popular spots like Kirby Lane Cafe. At home, Leah was the glue that held her family together. She was married to Bobby Dean Brewster, an accountant, and they had an 18-year-old son named Caleb. Leah and Caleb were particularly close, often spending weekends together hiking in the Barton Creek Greenbelt or watching Marvel movies. In the days before her death, Leah was very busy but also very excited. She was planning a big community fundraiser for the local homeless shelter. She spent hours designing posters and flyers, and she even managed to get a local radio station, QDX, to promote the event. Leah also had dreams of expanding her interior design business. She was in talks with a local magazine, Austin Monthly, to feature some of her work. Her future seemed bright, and she was looking forward to all the possibilities. Leah's personality was warm and generous. She was the type of person who would go out of her way to help a friend in need or to make a stranger feel welcome. Her friends and family knew her as a selfless, loving person who always put others first. But her tragic death would leave a deep void in the hearts of those who knew her. On the morning of March 12, 2018, the usually quiet neighborhood in Austin, Texas, was shattered by a gruesome discovery. At around 8:30 a.m., Leah Brewster's neighbor, Liesl Gonzalez Chan, decided to drop off some homemade tamales. Liesl and Leah often exchanged baked goods and shared morning coffee. As Liesl approached Leah's front door, she noticed it was slightly ajar. Thinking nothing of it, she knocked and called out Leah's name, but got no response. Concerned, Liesl stepped inside. She walked through the hallway, calling for Leah. As she entered the kitchen, she was met with a horrifying sight. Leah was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, motionless. The kitchen, usually spotless and filled with the smell of Leah's cooking, was in complete disarray. Liesl froze in shock, her mind struggling to process the scene in front of her. After a few moments, Liesl snapped out of her daze and fumbled for her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. The operator, sensing her distress, tried to calm her down and asked her to describe what she saw. Liesl's voice shook as she explained that her friend was lying on the kitchen floor and wasn't moving. The operator assured her that help was on the way and instructed her to wait outside until the police arrived. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air, and 2 police cars pulled up to the house. Officers quickly secured the area and entered the home. Liesl, still in a state of shock, was gently led away by a kind officer who asked her to sit down and take deep breaths. She was offered a blanket and a bottle of water as she tried to calm down. As news of the discovery spread, neighbors gathered outside, whispering and speculating about what had happened. The local news station, KXAN, soon arrived, and reporters began setting up their cameras. The neighborhood was buzzing with fear and curiosity, as everyone wondered how such a tragedy could occur in their peaceful community. Leah Brewster's body was carefully examined by the first responders. They confirmed she had been stabbed multiple times with a kitchen knife, which lay beside her. The brutality of the crime shocked everyone present. Liesl, still trying to comprehend the horror she had witnessed, provided a statement to the police. She described Leah as a wonderful person and expressed her disbelief that something so terrible could happen to someone so kind and loving. In the following hours, forensic teams arrived to start their investigation, marking the beginning of a long and complex case that would uncover dark secrets and hidden motives. The police arrived quickly at Leah Brewster's house on the morning of March 12, 2018, after Liesl Gonzalez-Chan's frantic 911 call. Officers Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera were the first on the scene. Arriving within minutes, they were experienced detectives with the Austin Police Department, known for their dedication and sharp investigative skills. As the officers entered the house, they were struck by the chaotic scene in the kitchen. The normally tidy room was in complete disarray, with broken dishes on the floor and blood splattered across the counters and walls. Leah Brewster lay on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood, with a kitchen knife nearby. It was clear that she had been stabbed multiple times, and the brutality of the attack was evident. Detective Costella, a tall man with a stern expression, immediately began assessing the scene, while Detective Rivera, known for her keen attention to detail, started documenting everything with her camera. They carefully examined the area around Leah's body, noting the signs of a struggle. The kitchen table was overturned, and a chair was broken, indicating that Leah had fought hard against her attacker. The detectives called in the forensic team, who arrived shortly after. The team used advanced tools to gather evidence, including swabs for DNA, fingerprint dusting kits, and high-resolution cameras to capture every detail. They meticulously collected samples of blood and other potential evidence, hoping to find clues that would lead them to the murderer. Detective Rivera noticed a set of muddy footprints leading from the back door into the kitchen. She pointed this out to the forensic team, who took detailed photographs and measurements. The footprints suggested that the killer had entered the house through the back, possibly trying to avoid detection. Detectives Costella and Rivera continued to work late into the night, reviewing the evidence and planning their next steps. They knew that solving Leah's murder would require thorough investigation and attention to every detail. The scene in Leah Brewster's kitchen was a puzzle they were determined to solve, piece by piece, to bring justice for Leah and her grieving family. The first suspect in the investigation was Caleb Brewster, Leah and Bobby Dean's 18-year-old son. Caleb was a high school senior with a bright future ahead of him. He was a popular student at Austin High School, known for his talent in basketball and his ambition to study engineering in college. His teachers spoke highly of his intelligence and dedication, and he had already received several scholarship offers. Caleb had a complicated relationship with his father but was very close to his mother. Leah was his biggest supporter, attending all his basketball games and helping him with college applications. However, there was a secret Caleb had been hiding. He was involved in a sexual relationship with his high school English teacher, Laura McMasters. Leah had just recently discovered this relationship before her death, which caused tension in the household. When detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera brought Caleb in for questioning, he appeared nervous but cooperative. He admitted to the relationship with Laura McMasters, explaining that they had grown close over the past year. He described Laura as supportive and understanding, someone he could confide in about his struggles at home and school. The detectives asked Caleb about the night of his mother's murder. He claimed he was at a friend's house studying for an upcoming exam. His friend, Jason Kim, confirmed Caleb's alibi, saying they had been working on a physics project together until late in the evening. However, the detectives were not entirely convinced and continued to press Caleb for more details. Caleb's nervousness grew as the interrogation continued. Detective Rivera, known for her empathetic approach, asked Caleb about his feelings towards his parents, especially after Leah discovered his sexual relationship with Laura. Caleb admitted that his mother's reaction had been harsh, and they had argued about it. He felt guilty for causing his mother distress, but insisted he had no reason to harm her. The police found explicit text messages on Caleb's phone between him and Laura McMasters, discussing their sexual relationship and Leah's disapproval. The messages revealed a deep bond between them and their fears about the future. Caleb expressed his frustration with his parents, but never hinted at any violent intentions. Despite his alibi, the police considered Caleb a person of interest. His sexual relationship with Laura McMasters and the tension at home provided potential motives. The detectives decided to keep a close eye on Caleb, reviewing his social media and phone records for any additional clues. Caleb's friends and teachers were shocked to hear about the investigation. They described him as a bright, ambitious young man with a promising future. The community couldn't believe that someone like Caleb could be involved in such a tragic event. The detectives, however, knew that appearances could be deceiving and continued to scrutinize every aspect of Caleb's life for answers. The second suspect in Leah Brewster's murder investigation was her husband, Bobby Dean Brewster. At 45 years old, Bobby Dean was known for his meticulous and highly organized nature. He worked as an accountant at a well-known local firm, and his colleagues described him as dependable but somewhat reserved. Bobby Dean was perceived as a dedicated family man, though his quiet demeanor often made him seem distant. During the interrogation, Bobby Dean was initially calm and cooperative. He provided a detailed account of his activities on the night of Leah's murder. He claimed he had been at home, watching a basketball game on ESPN and then going to bed early. However, his calmness began to waver as detectives pressed him on his relationship with Leah. The detectives, Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera, noticed signs of strain in Bobby Dean's demeanor when they mentioned Leah's recent discovery of Caleb's secret relationship with his high school English teacher, Laura McMasters. Bobby Dean shifted in his seat, and his responses became more defensive. He admitted that the news had caused tension in the family, but he insisted that he had nothing to do with Leah's death. As the questioning continued, it was revealed that Leah had also discovered something else that could serve as a motive. Leah had found out about Bobby Dean's own affair with Laura McMasters. This revelation had caused a significant rift between Leah and Bobby Dean. Leah's diary entries, which the police found, detailed her heartbreak and anger over her husband's betrayal. Bobby Dean's short temper was another point of interest for the investigators. Friends and family members noted that while he was usually composed, he could become very angry when provoked. Detectives Costella and Rivera questioned Bobby Dean about his temper and whether it had ever led to violence. Bobby Dean denied ever hurting Leah, but the detectives were not convinced. To gather more information, the police interviewed Bobby Dean's co-workers and neighbors. They described him as a man who kept to himself and rarely socialized. Some co-workers mentioned noticing changes in his behavior in the weeks leading up to Leah's murder. He seemed more stressed and distracted at work, often making mistakes in his otherwise flawless accounting records. Despite Bobby Dean's insistence on his innocence, the detectives felt they had enough reason to keep him under close watch. They continued to dig into his background, looking for any additional evidence that could link him to the crime. As the investigation unfolded, Bobby Dean remained a key suspect, his calm exterior masking the potential for deeper, darker motives. The police's thorough interrogation and evidence-gathering process aimed to uncover the truth behind Leah Brewster's tragic death, and Bobby Dean's actions and responses during the investigation only intensified their suspicions. The third suspect in the investigation was Laura McMasters, a 55-year-old high school English teacher at Caleb's High School. Laura was well-liked by her students and colleagues, known for her passion for literature and her dedication to helping students succeed. She often stayed late to assist with assignments and had a reputation for being empathetic and approachable. Laura's involvement with Caleb Brewster came to light during the investigation. The relationship was quite the scandal given their age difference and her position as his teacher. Detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera brought Laura in for questioning at the Austin Police Department. Laura arrived looking composed but clearly nervous about the situation. During the interrogation, Laura admitted to the sexual relationship with Caleb. She explained that it had started innocently, with her offering extra help after school, but had quickly developed into something sexual. Laura described her connection with Caleb as, quote, beautiful, stating that she cared deeply for him and wanted to support him through his family struggles. The detectives pressed Laura about her whereabouts on the night of Leah Brewster's murder. Laura claimed she was at home grading papers and preparing lesson plans for the upcoming week. She had no alibi, as she lived alone, and there were no witnesses to corroborate her story. This raised suspicions, and the detectives continued to probe. Laura's phone records showed numerous sexually explicit texts and naked pictures exchanged between her and Caleb, especially in the days leading up to Leah's death. The messages revealed their concerns about Leah discovering their relationship and the potential consequences. However, there was no direct evidence linking Laura to the murder. Detective Rivera, using her empathetic approach, asked Laura about her feelings towards Leah. Laura admitted that Leah's discovery of the relationship had caused significant tension. Leah had confronted Laura in her classroom, demanding she end the relationship with Caleb immediately. Laura described the confrontation as heated but insisted she had no intention of harming Leah or of ending the relationship. Despite her calm demeanor, the detectives sensed that Laura was hiding something. They searched her home, looking for any evidence that might connect her to the crime. They found nothing incriminating, but Laura remained a key suspect due to her close involvement with Caleb and the conflict with Leah. Laura's colleagues were shocked by the news. They described her as a dedicated and caring teacher, someone who went above and beyond for her students. The revelation of her sexual relationship with Caleb was hard for them to believe, and the idea that she could be involved in Leah's murder was even more difficult to grasp. As the investigation continued, Laura's life was turned upside down. The scrutiny from the police, the media, and the community weighed heavily on her. She maintained her innocence, cooperating with the authorities while trying to navigate the fallout from the scandal. The detectives kept Laura under close observation, searching for any slip-up or new evidence that could shed light on Leah Brewster's tragic death. On the afternoon of March 16, 2018, a breakthrough in the case came when new evidence was discovered. It was a warm, sunny day in Austin, and the police received a call from a local gardener who had been working in a nearby park, Zilker Metropolitan Park, when he stumbled upon a blood-stained glove hidden behind some bushes near the park's edge. He immediately contacted the Austin Police Department, and officers arrived at the scene within minutes. Detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera, who were leading the investigation, rushed to the park. They carefully retrieved the glove, making sure not to contaminate any potential evidence. The glove was sent to the forensic lab for analysis, and the area around the park was thoroughly searched for additional clues. The forensic team worked quickly, and the results came back later that evening. The blood on the glove matched Leah Brewster's, and there were traces of another substance inside the glove that could be DNA from the suspect. This discovery gave the detectives a renewed sense of urgency. They now had a tangible piece of evidence that could potentially link someone to the crime scene. Detective Rivera reviewed surveillance footage from around the park, hoping to spot anyone who might have been acting suspiciously on the day of Leah's murder. The footage revealed a figure wearing a dark hoodie, walking hurriedly away from the park around the time the murder was believed to have occurred. The person's face was not clearly visible, but the footage provided a lead. Further analysis of the glove's DNA revealed it matched Bobby Dean Brewster. The detectives were now more convinced than ever that he was involved in his wife's murder. They decided to bring him in for further questioning, armed with this new piece of evidence. During the second interrogation, Bobby Dean's calm demeanor began to crack. When confronted with the DNA evidence, he became defensive and evasive. He couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation for how his DNA ended up in a blood-stained glove found near the crime scene. The detectives pressed him harder, and his story started to fall apart. Meanwhile, the forensic team continued to search for additional evidence. They discovered a partial fingerprint on the handle of the kitchen knife used in the murder. This fingerprint also matched Bobby Dean's, strengthening the case against him. The discovery of the glove and the matching DNA and fingerprint evidence were pivotal in the investigation. The detectives now had enough to move forward with their case against Bobby Dean. They continued to gather more evidence, preparing to make an arrest and bring justice for Leah Brewster. The new evidence brought a sense of relief to the community, who had been on edge since Leah's tragic death. It also gave Leah's family hope that the person responsible for her murder would finally be held accountable. On March 18, 2018, armed with crucial evidence, the police were ready to make their move. Bobby Dean Brewster, 45, an accountant by profession, had become their primary suspect. Known for his meticulous and organized nature, Bobby Dean's life seemed orderly from the outside, but inside he was battling jealousy and rage. The investigation revealed that Bobby Dean had discovered his son Caleb's secret relationship with Laura McMasters, the English teacher. This revelation angered him, but what infuriated him more was Leah's discovery of his own affair with Laura. Driven by jealousy and rage, Bobby Dean had initially planned to confront Caleb, his love rival. However, when Leah entered the room where he was waiting, his anger redirected toward her. In a moment of uncontrollable rage, he grabbed the kitchen knife and stabbed Leah to death. Detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera, who had been leading the investigation, arrived at Bobby Dean's office early that morning. They had an arrest warrant and the evidence needed to take him into custody. Bobby Dean was taken by surprise as the detectives entered his office and informed him of the charges. His calm exterior shattered, and he became visibly agitated. Bobby Dean was handcuffed and escorted out of his office, past shocked colleagues. His arrest made headlines, with local news stations covering the story. The community was stunned, and the news spread quickly through social media. Leah's family had mixed emotions about Bobby Dean's arrest. They were relieved that the person responsible for Leah's death was caught, but they were also devastated that it was someone so close to them. Leah's sister, Samantha, expressed her sorrow and anger in an interview, stating that she felt betrayed by Bobby Dean, whom she had trusted. As Bobby Dean was led away by the police, his reaction was a mix of shock and resignation. He didn't resist the arrest, knowing the weight of the evidence against him. The detectives took him to the Austin Police Department for booking, where he was processed and placed in a holding cell. The evidence, including the blood-stained glove with Bobby Dean's DNA, the surveillance footage, and the partial fingerprint on the knife, were crucial in solving the case. The detectives' relentless pursuit of justice ensured that Leah Brewster's killer was held accountable. The arrest marked a significant step towards justice for Leah's family, providing them with some solace amid their grief. The community rallied around them, offering support and condolences as they began to process the tragic events. The trial of Bobby Dean Brewster began on July 10, 2018, at the Travis County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed with reporters from KVUE, the Austin American-Statesman, and other media outlets. The community watched closely as the proceedings unfolded. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Sarah Bynading, a 42-year-old with a reputation for being tough and tenacious. Bynading laid out the case against Bobby Dean with meticulous detail. She presented the blood-stained glove, the partial fingerprint on the knife, and the DNA evidence linking Bobby Dean to the crime. She argued that Bobby Dean's jealousy and rage led him to murder his wife, Leah Brewster, in a fit of uncontrolled anger. On the defense side was attorney Michael Grove Basado, a 50-year-old known for his calm demeanor and persuasive arguments. Grove Basado contended that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no clear motive for Bobby Dean to kill his wife. He tried to cast doubt on the reliability of the forensic evidence and suggested that someone else could have been responsible for Leah's death. Throughout the trial, Leah's family sat in the front row, their faces a mixture of sadness and determination. Her sister often wiped away tears as she listened to the testimonies and evidence presented. The community's support was palpable, with many residents showing up to the courthouse to stand by Leah's family. Caleb Brewster, now a college freshman, also attended the trial. He had to relive the painful memories of his mother's death and the shocking revelation of his father's affair with his teacher, Laura McMasters. Laura herself testified, admitting to the relationship with both Bobby Dean and Caleb, but maintaining her innocence regarding the murder. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On July 25, 2018, they returned with a verdict. Bobby Dean Brewster was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Bobby Dean showed little emotion, staring straight ahead as his fate was sealed. The sentencing took place on August 1, 2018. The judge sentenced Bobby Dean to just 15 years in prison. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Leah's family felt some relief that justice had been served, but the pain of losing Leah was still raw. Samantha expressed her hope that Bobby Dean would reflect on his actions and the damage he had caused. The community had a similar response. Some felt the sentence was too lenient, given the brutal nature of the crime. Others believed it was fair, considering Bobby Dean's previously clean record and the complex emotions involved. Bobby Dean's conviction and sentencing marked the end of a painful chapter for Leah's family and the Austin community. The trial had exposed deep wounds and secrets, but it also brought a measure of justice for Leah Brewster's untimely death. The family and community now faced the challenge of healing and moving forward from this tragedy. After the trial, life in Austin slowly returned to normal, but the impact of Leah Brewster's murder lingered. Leah's family, particularly her sister Samantha, faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. Samantha became a vocal advocate for domestic violence awareness, partnering with local organizations like Safe Austin to educate others and provide support to victims. Caleb Brewster, deeply affected by the loss of his mother and the scandal surrounding his father's actions, struggled to find his footing. He decided to transfer to a college out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the painful memories. Caleb focused on his studies in basketball, finding solace in the sport his mother had always supported him in. Laura McMasters continued her teaching position at Austin High School despite the scandal tarnishing her reputation. She faced harsh judgment from the community. In fact, Laura won an award in 2020 for the success in teaching students during the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite her success as a teacher, the stigma of the affair and her involvement in the case continued to follow her. The Brewster home, once a symbol of the happy family, stood empty for several months before being sold. The new owners, aware of the tragic history, sought to bring new life to the house. They renovated and invited the community to a housewarming, symbolizing a fresh start and the healing power of community support. Bobby Dean Brewster, now serving his sentence, had time to reflect on his actions. The prison system offered counseling and rehabilitation programs, which he participated in, hoping to understand and atone for his crimes. His relationship with Caleb remained strained, but there was hope that time and reflection might lead to reconciliation. The trial and its aftermath had left an indelible mark on everyone involved. Leah Brewster's legacy lived on through the positive changes and awareness her tragic death inspired. The community of Austin learned to come together, supporting one another and working towards a future where such tragedies could be prevented. In today's episode, we take you to a seemingly perfect marriage that was shattered by betrayal, secrets, and a brutal murder. This is the story of Colette Jackson, a loving wife, and the devastating consequences of uncovering a secret that would destroy everything. Colette Jackson was a 36-year-old woman who lived in Lodi, New Jersey. She was known in her community as a kind-hearted and creative person who loved helping others, especially children. Colette worked as an art teacher in a local school where she taught disadvantaged kids. She believed that art could make a difference in the lives of children who didn't have much else to turn to. Colette's classroom was always full of bright colors, paintings, and drawings. She was the type of teacher who stayed late after school to help her students finish projects or just to talk if they needed someone to listen. Her passion for art wasn't just limited to the classroom. Colette lived in a modest but cozy home with her husband, Stephen Jackson. The couple had been married for nearly 10 years and appeared to have a strong and happy marriage. They often attended community events together, such as the Lodi Street Fair and the annual town Christmas parade. Colette and Stephen were well-liked by their neighbors, who often described them as a perfect couple. However, beneath the surface, Colette was dealing with more than anyone knew. In the weeks leading up to her death, Colette had been feeling increasingly stressed and anxious. She had mentioned to a close friend that she felt something was off in her marriage, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Despite her worries, Colette continued to pour herself into her work. She had recently started planning a new art program for her students, which she hoped would be ready by the fall. Colette was excited about the future and had big plans for both her career and her personal life. She had even started talking about the possibility of having children, something she and Stephen had been considering for a while. But Colette's dreams and plans would never come to fruition. She was unaware that her life was about to be tragically cut short, and the secrets that had been hidden for so long would soon come to light, changing everything. On the morning of August 14, 2013, the peaceful suburb of Lodi, New Jersey, was shaken by a horrifying discovery. At around 9:30 a.m., Angela Lagrima, a close friend of Colette Jackson, arrived at the Jackson home for their regular coffee date. Angela and Colette had been friends for years, often spending time together chatting about life, work, and their mutual love for art. That morning, Angela expected nothing more than a relaxing visit with her friend. But as she approached the house, she noticed that something seemed off. The curtains were drawn, and the front door, usually open to let in the morning light, was tightly shut. When Angela entered the living room, she was met with a scene that would haunt her forever. Colette was lying on the floor, her throat slit so deeply that her neck was nearly severed. Blood had cooled around her, staining the carpet a dark red. The sight was so shocking that Angela froze, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. After a few moments, she snapped out of her shock and frantically dialed 911, her hands shaking so badly that she nearly dropped the phone. Angela's voice was barely steady as she spoke to the emergency operator, describing what she had found. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what had happened. She couldn't believe that her friend, the kind and gentle Colette, had met such a violent end. The operator instructed Angela to wait outside until the police arrived, which she did, standing on the front lawn, numb and in disbelief. As she waited, Angela couldn't help but think about the last time she had seen Colette, just a few days earlier. They had met up for lunch at a local diner, talking and laughing as they always did. Colette had seemed a bit tired, but otherwise fine. Now, just days later, she was gone, and the life she had been so passionate about had been brutally taken from her. The Lodi Police Department received the 911 call at 9:45 a.m. on August 14, 2013. Within minutes, officers arrived at the Jackson home, quickly securing the area. Detective Frank Marino, a 20-year veteran of the force known for his calm demeanor and meticulous attention to detail led the investigation. Marino had seen his share of crime scenes, but the brutality of this one struck him immediately. As the police entered the house, they were met with the stark contrast between the cozy, lived-in space and the gruesome scene in the living room. Colette Jackson's lifeless body lay on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood that had soaked into the carpet. Her throat had been slit with such force that it nearly severed her neck. The blood spatter on the walls and nearby furniture indicated a violent struggle. Marino took a moment to absorb the scene before instructing his team to begin the investigation. The crime scene was treated with the utmost care. The detectives worked methodically, photographing every angle of the room and collecting evidence. They noticed that nothing appeared to be out of place, no signs of forced entry or theft. Colette's purse was still on the kitchen counter, her keys next to it. Her phone was on the coffee table, untouched. This led Marino to believe that Colette had known her attacker and had not expected any danger. The murder weapon, a large kitchen knife, was found near Colette's body, covered in blood. Marino instructed the forensic team to bag the knife for further analysis. He also requested that they test the blood for fingerprints, hoping that the killer might have left a trace. The team dusted for prints on every surface, carefully lifting samples to be sent to the lab. As they continued their search, Marino noticed a small, partially open box in the corner of the room. Inside were prescription pill bottles, one of which was empty. Marino found this odd, given that Colette was not known to be on any heavy medication. He made a note to follow up on the pills, suspecting they could be a clue to the killer's identity. The medical examiner, Dr. Agnes Jiang, arrived shortly after and began her examination of Colette's body. Jiang, who had worked closely with Marino on previous cases, shared his preliminary findings. The deep, clean cut to the throat suggested a sharp, heavy blade and a strong hand. Jiang estimated that Colette had been dead for several hours, likely since the early hours of the morning. By the time the sun began to set, the police had gathered all the evidence they could find. The once warm and inviting home now felt cold and empty, marked by the traces of a life abruptly ended. Marino knew this was just the beginning. The next step was to unravel the mystery of who could have committed such a heinous act and why. Stephen Jackson, Colette's husband, was the first person the police investigated. At 40 years old, Stephen was a well-known accountant in Lodi. He was respected for his precision with numbers and was described by colleagues as dependable but quiet. Stephen had a routine life, early mornings, long hours at the office, and weekend golf outings with his best friend, Ernie Lagrima. On the surface, he seemed like a devoted husband, but Detective Frank Marino sensed that there was more to his story. When police first questioned Stephen, he appeared distraught, claiming to be devastated by his wife's death. He told officers that he had been out of the house the previous night, visiting his elderly mother in a nearby town. His alibi seemed solid at first, as his mother and a neighbor both confirmed that Stephen had been there until late in the evening. However, Marino wasn't entirely convinced. There was something off about Stephen's behavior. He wasn't just grieving. He seemed nervous, almost as if he were hiding something. As the interview continued, Stephen's demeanor shifted. When Marino began asking about his relationship with Colette, Stephen grew defensive. He insisted that their marriage was strong, despite the usual ups and downs. But when pressed about his whereabouts during the early morning hours of August 14, Stephen hesitated. He stammered slightly before repeating that he had been at his mother's house. Marino noted this hesitation, suspecting that Stephen wasn't telling the whole truth. The investigation took a turn when the police discovered Stephen's addiction to opiates. A search of the Jackson home uncovered several empty pill bottles hidden in Stephen's closet. The pills were prescribed to different names, raising suspicion that Stephen had been illegally obtaining them. When confronted with this evidence, Stephen initially denied any wrongdoing, but eventually he broke down and admitted to the addiction. He claimed that he had been struggling for years and that Colette didn't know about it. Stephen's addiction raised red flags for the investigators. They began to wonder if it was connected to Colette's murder. Could Stephen's drug habit have driven him to kill his wife, either in a moment of rage or to cover up his secret? Marino asked Stephen if he had ever gotten violent with Colette, but Stephen vehemently denied it, insisting that he loved her and would never hurt her. Despite Stephen's denials, Marino remained suspicious. The discovery of the opiates, combined with Stephen's inconsistent answers, suggested that there was more to his story. The police decided to keep a close eye on Stephen as they continued to piece together the events leading up to Colette's death. They needed more evidence before they could make an arrest, But Stephen was now firmly in their sights. Ernie Lagrima, Stephen's best friend, and a well-known lawyer in Lodi, was the second person the police focused on. Ernie, 52, had a reputation for being charismatic and outgoing, often the life of the party at local gatherings. He and Stephen had been friends since college, and their bond seemed unbreakable. They were known for their regular weekend golf outings, which they often talked about at the local diner, Jerry's Place, where they were regulars. But as Detective Frank Marino dug deeper into Ernie's life, he uncovered a shocking secret. The police brought Ernie in for questioning at the station. He appeared calm and cooperative, even joking with the officers as they began the interview. Ernie expressed disbelief at Colette's murder, claiming he couldn't imagine why anyone would want to harm her. He described her as a sweet, kind woman who was always supportive of Stephen. But as the questioning continued, Marino noticed a shift in Ernie's demeanor. When asked about his relationship with Stephen, Ernie became more guarded, carefully choosing his words. Marino pressed Ernie about the golf outings he and Stephen frequently took. Ernie insisted that they were just regular trips, nothing more than a chance to relax and unwind. But when Marino mentioned the possibility of something more going on during these trips, Ernie's composure faltered. He hesitated before admitting that he and Stephen had been involved in a sexual relationship for several years. They had kept it hidden from everyone, including their wives, fearing the consequences if it ever came to light. Ernie's confession was a bombshell for the investigators. It provided a possible motive for Colette's murder, had she discovered the affair and threatened to expose them. Ernie insisted that Colette had no idea about the relationship and that Stephen would never have harmed her. He claimed that their relationship was based on love and that Stephen was deeply troubled by the murder. Despite Ernie's calm demeanor, Marino wasn't convinced. The affair added a new layer of complexity to the case, and Marino suspected that Ernie might be hiding more. The police decided to dig deeper into Ernie's background, checking his alibi for the night of the murder and looking into his phone records to see if there were any suspicious communications between him and Stephen. Ernie's charm and confidence couldn't erase the fact that he was now a key suspect in Colette's murder, and Marino knew they needed to keep a close watch on him. The third person under scrutiny was Angela Lagrima, Ernie's wife and a close friend of Colette. At 46, Angela was a dedicated teacher at a school for economically disadvantaged children, known for her kind heart and tireless efforts to support her students. She and Colette had shared many conversations about their work and their lives, often meeting for coffee at the local Starbucks. Angela was devastated by Colette's death, and at first glance, she seemed an unlikely suspect. However, as the investigation continued, the police uncovered information that made them reconsider. Angela was brought in for questioning the day after Ernie's confession. She appeared composed but visibly saddened, her voice shaking slightly as she spoke about Colette. Angela described Colette as a dear friend, someone she could always rely on. She insisted that she had no idea who would want to harm her. But when Detective Frank Marino began asking about her marriage, Angela's demeanor changed. She became more guarded, her answers shorter and less forthcoming. Marino pressed Angela about her knowledge of Ernie and Stephen's sexual relationship. To the surprise of the investigators, Angela admitted that she had known about the affair for some time. She explained that she had discovered them together about a year earlier, coming home early from a friend's wedding to find them curled up together in her bed. Angela said she was shocked at first, but decided against confronting Ernie. She said decided to accept it. She told the detectives that she believed in the saying different strokes for different folks, and had chosen not to interfere. This revelation cast Angela in a new light. If she had known about the affair, could she have been motivated by jealousy or anger? Marino asked if she had ever discussed the relationship with Colette, but Angela insisted that she had kept it to herself, not wanting to hurt her friend. She claimed that she had made peace with the situation and had no reason to harm Colette. Despite Angela's calm explanation, the police couldn't ignore the possibility that her knowledge of the affair might have led to resentment. They decided to look deeper into her actions leading up to the murder. Angela's phone records and her whereabouts on the night of August 13 were closely examined. Although Angela maintained her innocence, the investigators couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, Angela remained a person of interest. Her connection to both Colette and the affair made her involvement in the case impossible to ignore. The police knew that they needed to keep pressing, hoping to uncover the truth about what really happened that night. On the morning of August 18, 2013, the investigation took a critical turn. It was a warm summer day in Lodi, with the temperature already climbing into the 80s by mid-morning. Detective Frank Marino and his team were continuing their work at the Jackson home, determined to find any overlooked clues. As the sun beat down on the quiet suburban neighborhood, Marino received a call from the forensic lab that would shift the direction of the case. The lab had completed an in-depth analysis of the blood found on the kitchen knife at the crime scene. Initially, the blood was assumed to belong solely to Colette, but the lab had discovered something unexpected, a small but distinct trace of another person's DNA mixed with the blood. Marino's heart raced as he listened to the results. The DNA belonged to Stephen Jackson. This finding was significant. It suggested that Stephen had been much closer to the crime than he had initially claimed. The presence of his DNA on the murder weapon raised serious questions about his involvement. Marino immediately contacted Stephen's lawyer to arrange a follow-up interview, but Stephen had gone into hiding, fueling the police's suspicions even further. Later that day, the police received another crucial piece of evidence. A neighbor who had been out of town during the initial investigation came forward with new information. The neighbor recalled seeing Stephen's car parked outside the Jackson home at around 2:00 a.m. on the night of the murder. This directly contradicted Stephen's earlier alibi that he had spent the night at his mother's house. With this new timeline in mind, Marino revisited the security footage from nearby homes. After hours of reviewing tapes, the team finally caught a glimpse of Stephen's car driving down the street at 1:45 a.m., just minutes before the neighbor spotted it parked at the house. This new evidence placed Stephen at the scene of the crime during the critical hours when Colette was murdered. Marino and his team felt a growing sense of urgency. The evidence was mounting against Stephen, but they knew they needed more to secure an arrest. They focused on tracking Stephen's movements after the crime, using his cell phone records to trace his location. The data showed that he had driven to a remote area outside of Lodi, where he stayed for several hours before returning home later that morning. This new evidence gave the police a much clearer picture of what had happened that night. Stephen's DNA on the knife, the neighbor's testimony, and the security footage all pointed to him being involved in Colette's death. The investigation was now centered on finding Stephen and bringing him in for questioning. On the evening of August 20, 2013, the Lodi police were closing in on their prime suspect, Stephen Jackson. The mounting evidence, including his DNA on the murder weapon, and the neighbor's testimony placing him at the scene, had made it clear that Stephen was involved in his wife Colette's brutal murder. As the sun began to set, Detective Frank Marino and his team prepared for the next step, Stephen's arrest. Stephen, a 40-year-old accountant, had always been seen as a quiet and dependable man. But behind his reserved exterior, he harbored dark secrets that would soon unravel. Stephen had been having a secret love affair with his best friend, Ernie Lagrima, for years. When Colette accidentally discovered the affair, she threatened to divorce him. Stephen, fearing the consequences, snapped. In a moment of panic and rage, he brutally slit her throat, leaving her to die in their home. To cover up his crime, Stephen bribed the medical examiner, who was also his drug dealer, to falsely rule Colette's death as natural due to her previous medical condition. The police, armed with an arrest warrant, arrived at Stephen's mother's house, where he had been hiding. It was around 7:00 p.m., and the neighborhood was quiet. As the officers approached the door, Stephen, sensing that his time was up, tried to flee through the back. But the police had anticipated this and quickly apprehended him. Stephen was handcuffed and led to a squad car, his face a mix of shock and resignation. He didn't resist. It was as if he knew the inevitable had finally caught up with him. Back at the station, Stephen was formally charged with the murder of his wife, Colette Jackson. The news of his arrests sent shockwaves through the Lodi community, especially among Colette's family and friends. They had known Stephen as a devoted husband, but the revelation of his affair and the brutal nature of the crime left them in disbelief. Colette's family, devastated by the loss and betrayal, expressed a mix of relief and sorrow. They were relieved that justice was being served, but the pain of losing Colette in such a horrific way was overwhelming. Stephen's arrest also deeply affected Ernie and Angela Lagrima. Ernie was in shock, unable to believe that his secret relationship had led to such a tragedy. Angela, who had urged Stephen to confess, was heartbroken but stood by her husband, believing that he had never intended for things to end this way. As Stephen was processed and led to his cell, Marino knew the case was far from over. The trial would be the next battle, and it was clear that this story was far from its conclusion. Stephen Jackson's trial began in January 2014, drawing significant attention from the local community and media. The courtroom was packed with reporters and onlookers, all eager to see how the case would unfold. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Linda Caruso, 45, was determined to secure a conviction. Caruso was known for her fierce dedication to justice and had built a strong case against Stephen. She argued that Stephen had committed premeditated murder driven by fear and desperation after Colette discovered his affair with Ernie Lagrima. Caruso painted a picture of a man who would stop at nothing to keep his secret life hidden, even if it meant killing his wife. The defense, led by Stephen's attorney, Michael Friedman, 50, took a different approach. Friedman was a seasoned lawyer with a reputation for taking on challenging cases. He argued that Stephen's actions were not premeditated but the result of a momentary lapse in judgment. Friedman claimed that Stephen had acted in a fit of rage and panic, not with the intent to kill. He pointed to Stephen's clean criminal record and his role as a devoted husband and father, suggesting that this crime was out of character and not deserving of a harsh sentence. Throughout the trial, Colette's family sat in the front row, their emotions visible as they listened to the testimony. Her mother, Nancy, often wept quietly, while her father, Robert, stared straight ahead, his face a mask of grief. They had lost a daughter, and now they were witnessing the man who had taken her from them try to avoid full responsibility for his actions. The jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching a verdict. On February 15, 2014, they found Stephen Jackson guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Caruso, satisfied with the outcome, believed that justice had been served, although she had hoped for a first-degree conviction. During the sentencing, Stephen was given 25 years to life in prison. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Colette's family felt that it was not enough, believing that Stephen should have received a harsher punishment for the brutal way he had taken Colette's life. Ernie Lagrima, who had attended every day of the trial, looked devastated, knowing that their affair had led to such a tragic end. Angela, who had urged Stephen to confess, remained by her husband's side, but the toll of the trial and the sentencing was clear on her face. As Stephen was led away, the courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind the echoes of a trial that had torn apart families and shaken a community. After Stephen Jackson's conviction, life changed dramatically for everyone involved. Colette's family tried to rebuild their lives, but the pain of losing her in such a violent way left a permanent scar. Her parents found solace in the support of friends and the community, but the loss of their daughter was a burden they would carry forever. They started a foundation in Colette's name, aimed at helping survivors of domestic violence, hoping to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Ernie Lagrima's life was also deeply affected. The affair that had once been his secret became public knowledge, and he faced harsh judgment from the community. Ernie, once a well-respected lawyer, found his reputation in ruins. He struggled to continue practicing law and eventually closed his practice, unable to escape the shadow of the trial. The guilt he felt over his role in the events that led to Colette's death was overwhelming. He withdrew from public life, spending most of his time in solitude, haunted by the choices he had made. Angela Lagrima, Ernie's wife, remained by his side, but their relationship was forever altered. Angela had been the one to encourage Stephen to confess, believing it was the right thing to do. However, the public scrutiny and the weight of the scandal strained their marriage. The couple moved away from Lodi, seeking a fresh start in a new town where they could leave the past behind. Despite the challenges, Angela remained committed to rebuilding their life together, though it was clear that the events had left a deep impact on both of them. Detective Frank Marino, who had led the investigation, continued his work with the Lodi Police Department. The case had been one of the most challenging of his career, and while he was proud of bringing Stephen to justice, the brutality of the crime and the pain it caused the families involved stayed with him. Marino became more vocal about the importance of mental health support for law enforcement officers, recognizing the toll that such cases could take on those tasked with solving them. Stephen Jackson, now serving his sentence in a state prison, adjusted to life behind bars. He spent much of his time in isolation, reflecting on the choices that had led him there. Stephen was a model prisoner, but the weight of his actions hung heavy on him. He occasionally received letters from Angela, who continued to check in on him, but he had little contact with the outside world. His life, once marked by a stable career and a seemingly happy marriage, was now defined by the walls of his cell and the knowledge that he had destroyed not only his life but the lives of those around him. Rebecca Becky Frederickson was a 31-year-old woman living in San Antonio, Texas. She was known throughout her community for her warm personality and her incredible talent for baking. Becky owned and operated Sweet Treats, a popular local bakery that had become a staple in the neighborhood. Her shop was known for its delicious pastries, especially her famous chocolate chip cookies and pumpkin spice muffins, a trendy treat beloved by millennials everywhere. Becky had a loyal customer base, many of whom had been coming to her bakery since it first opened. Becky was married to Michael Frederickson, a 35-year-old financial advisor. They had been married for 5 years after meeting at a friend's wedding, and on the surface, their life seemed perfect. They lived in a cozy one-story home not far from the bakery, and were well-liked in the community, with Becky often donating cakes and other baked goods to local schools and events, like the annual San Antonio Christmas Parade. However, in the months leading up to her death, Becky had been feeling a growing sense of unease. She noticed that Michael had become distant, often coming home late from work and showing little interest in their marriage even after Becky, who had always dreamed of starting a family, was diagnosed with endometriosis, which made it difficult for her to conceive. Despite these challenges, Becky remained hopeful. She threw herself into her work, often staying late at the bakery to perfect new recipes. In September 2019, Becky was preparing for the busy holiday season. She had just begun planning the bakery's Halloween-themed treats, which were always a big hit with customers. But even as she focused on her business, Becky couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong in her personal life. She tried to talk to Michael about her concerns, but he always brushed them off, leaving Becky to wonder what was really going on. Becky's friends and customers described her as sweet, generous, and hardworking. She was the kind of person who would go out of her way to help others, and her warm smile was a welcome sight to everyone who knew her. Her death would leave a void in the community that would be hard to fill. On September 15, 2019, at approximately 7:30 a.m., the lifeless body of Rebecca Becky Frederickson was discovered in the kitchen of her San Antonio home. It was a warm Sunday morning, and the city was just starting to wake up. Becky's neighbor, Karen Simmons, a 56-year-old retired schoolteacher, was the one who found her. Karen had noticed that Becky's bakery, Sweet Treats, hadn't opened on time that morning. This was unusual. Becky's bakery was almost always bustling with customers eager for her famous cookies and cakes. Concerned, Karen decided to check on Becky. She walked the short distance to Becky's home, which was just around the corner from the bakery. When she arrived, she found the front door slightly ajar, which immediately set off alarm bells. Becky was always careful about locking up, especially after a few break-ins had been reported in the neighborhood earlier that year. Karen hesitated but then pushed the door open and called out Becky's name. There was no answer. She stepped inside and noticed a strange silence. The house was neat and tidy, except for the kitchen. As Karen entered the kitchen, her heart sank. Becky was lying on the floor, surrounded by a pool of blood. The rolling pin, which Becky always kept on the kitchen counter, was on the floor beside her, stained with blood. The sight was horrifying. The once warm and welcoming kitchen, where Becky had baked so many treats, was now a crime scene. Karen was in shock but managed to dial 911. Her hands trembled as she gave the dispatcher the address and explained what she had found. She stayed on the line until the police arrived, all the while trying to hold back tears. Karen later told investigators that Becky's face was so badly injured that she could hardly recognize her. When the police arrived, they found Karen standing outside, visibly shaken and in tears. She could barely speak, and the officers had to help her to a nearby bench to sit down. The neighborhood quickly buzzed with news of Becky's death, leaving everyone in disbelief. How could such a kind and gentle woman meet such a violent end? When the San Antonio Police Department received the 911 call on September 15, 2019, officers arrived at the scene within minutes. The responding officers were Surgeon Maria Diaz, a 42-year-old veteran with a reputation for being thorough and compassionate, and Officer James O'Meal, a 28-year-old who had only been on the force for 3 years, but was eager to learn. They quickly secured the area, setting up yellow crime scene tape around Becky Frederickson's small single-story home. The quiet neighborhood, typically filled with the scent of fresh pastries from Becky's bakery, was now overtaken by the flashing lights of police cars and the hum of emergency radios. As they entered the house, the officers were struck by the eerie silence. The living room was untouched, with cozy furniture and framed photos of Becky's wedding day displayed on the walls. But as they approached the kitchen, the scene changed dramatically. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and comfort, was now a gruesome crime scene. Becky's body lay in the center of the room. Her blood spattered the white-tiled floor, and the rolling pin, a symbol of her love for baking, was lying nearby, covered in blood. Surgeon Diaz's experience kicked in as she began to assess the situation. The scene indicated a violent struggle. Chairs were knocked over, and a mixing bowl had fallen to the floor, its contents spilled out. Becky's apron was stained with blood, and her hands showed defensive wounds, suggesting she had fought hard for her life. Officer O'Meal took photos of the scene while Diaz carefully noted the details. The forensic team arrived soon after, led by the team collected fingerprints, blood samples, and any other evidence that might help piece together what had happened. The medical examiner, Dr. Lillian Pang, a no-nonsense 55-year-old with decades of experience, arrived to examine the body. She noted that Becky had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to her head, and the time of death was estimated to be between 10 p.m. and midnight the previous evening. The brutality of the attack shocked everyone present, including the seasoned investigators. Outside, the news of Becky's death spread quickly. Neighbors gathered, whispering in disbelief. Many of them knew Becky personally, having bought her baked goods for years. The sight of police cars and the knowledge of what had happened inside the house left the community in a state of shock and mourning. As the investigation continued, the police focused on gathering every piece of evidence they could find. They knew that the crime scene held the key to solving this brutal murder. They needed to find out who could have committed such a heinous act against a beloved member of the community. The investigation into Becky Frederickson's murder quickly turned its focus on her husband, Michael Frederickson. Michael, 35, was a well-known financial advisor in San Antonio. To his clients, he was the picture of professionalism, calm, dependable, and trustworthy. They have a strong reputation in the community, often seen at networking events and charity functions. However, behind closed doors, Michaels was far from every woman's dream husband. He was completely different, angry with an insatiable sexual appetite his wife could never fulfill. He was a man of secrets, deeply unhappy with his life and marriage. In the days following Becky's death, investigators dug into Michael's personal life. They learned that the Fredericksons' marriage had been strained for quite some time. Becky's endometriosis diagnosis had not only shattered her dream of starting a family, but also placed significant strain on the sexual aspect of their relationship. Michael, who had once been an attentive and loving husband, grew distant and frustrated. He began spending more time at work and less time at home, often coming back late at night or even after unexplained absences of several days. Colleagues noticed that he seemed stressed, but Michael brushed off their concerns, saying it was just life stuff. The real shock came when police uncovered Michael's affair with Becky's own mother, Margaret Ruth Breedlove. Ruth, who had re-entered Becky's life only a few years earlier, was 48 and still possessed a charismatic charm and smoldering sexually her somewhat restrained daughter couldn't match. The affair had started as a harmless flirtation, but quickly escalated into something much more serious. Michael and Ruth had been secretly seeing each other for sex, even having sex on Becky's bed when she wasn't home. The affair shocked the investigation, painting a picture of a man caught between a troubled mother-daughter relationship and a tangled web of deceit. During his interrogation, Michael initially denied any involvement in Becky's murder. He maintained that he had been at the office late, working on a client's portfolio, and had come home to find Becky already dead. However, as detectives pressed him about his secret sexual relationship with Ruth, Michael's calm demeanor began to crack. He became defensive, insisting that the affair had nothing to do with Becky's death. But when detectives confronted him with evidence of his infidelity, including explicit text messages and naked pictures sent between him and Ruth, Michael's composure shattered. Police noted that Michael's behavior was suspicious, his answers were evasive, and he struggled to provide a clear timeline of his actions on the night of the murder. Investigators also found it odd that Michael showed little emotion when discussing Becky's death, often speaking about her in a detached manner as if she was just some dead person you saw on the news. Despite his attempts to distance himself from the crime, Michael's affair with Ruth provided a strong motive for murder. The pressure on Michael was mounting, and detectives were determined to get to the truth. As the investigation into Becky Frederickson's murder deepened, police turned their attention to Margaret Ruth Breedlove, Becky's 48-year-old mother. Ruth had a complicated history that raised several red flags for detectives. She had re-entered Becky's life just a few years earlier after spending decades living a free-spirited and often reckless lifestyle. Ruth had moved from Oakland, California, to San Antonio to reconnect with her daughter, but her arrival had brought more turmoil than healing. Ruth was a striking woman who had always enjoyed being the center of attention. Even in her late 40s, she maintained a youthful appearance and a sexually magnetic personality that drew people to her. After giving birth to Becky at the tender age of 17 and leaving her in the care of her own mother when Becky was just a child, Ruth had spent years drifting from one job to another and from one relationship to the next. She had worked as a house painter in Oakland, where she was known for her bold fashion choices and colorful personality. Ruth's life took a dramatic turn when she joined a cult known as the Sunshine Family in the late 1990s, a decision that led her to lose contact with Becky for nearly 2 decades. When Ruth finally resurfaced in Becky's life, it was clear that she had not changed much. She was still the same flirtatious, sexual attention-seeking woman she had always been, and she quickly became a disruptive force in Becky's marriage. Ruth openly flirted with Becky's husband, Michael, even going so far as to make out with him in front of her daughter. This behavior strained the new and already fragile relationship between mother and daughter. During her interrogation, Ruth was candid about her affair with Michael, admitting that sex she had been having with Michael was, quote, marvelous. She described the relationship as a passionate, all-consuming love affair that had given her a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. Ruth justified her actions by insisting that Michael was sexually unfulfilled in his marriage and that she was simply offering him the excitement and fulfillment he craved. To Ruth, the affair was not just a fling. It was a deep, soul-to-soul connection that she believed was meant to be. However, Ruth denied any involvement in Becky's murder. She claimed that she had been at home on the night of the killing, watching Real Housewives and sipping a glass of red wine. Her tone during the interrogation was defiant, almost as if she believed that her actions were justified. Detectives noted that Ruth showed little remorse for the affair and seemed more concerned about how the revelation of the relationship would affect her than about her daughter's death. Ruth's lack of empathy in her affair with Michael made her a strong suspect, but there was no direct evidence linking her to the crime. Despite her claims of innocence, investigators were not convinced, and they continued to scrutinize her every move. In the investigation of Becky Frederickson's murder, police also turned their attention to a third suspect, Danny La Culebra Hernandez Basco. Danny, 22, was a figure with a notorious reputation in San Antonio. Originally from Tamaulipas, Mexico, Danny had a long criminal record that included theft, assault, and drug-related charges. His nickname, La Culebra, which means the snake in English, was a reflection of his slippery, dangerous nature. Danny was known to be a rough and intimidating presence in the community. He had been spotted near Becky's bakery several times in the weeks leading up to her murder, leading to rumors that he was involved in some sort of criminal activity in the area. Witnesses reported seeing him lurking around the neighborhood, often dressed in dark clothing and keeping to the shadows. He was the kind of person who made people nervous, someone who seemed always to be on the edge of violence. When police brought Danny in for questioning, they were prepared for a difficult interrogation. Danny, however, surprised them by maintaining his innocence. He claimed he had nothing to do with Becky's murder and that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. According to Danny, he had been in the area to meet up with some old friends from his neighborhood who had recently immigrated to the United States, not to cause any trouble. He insisted that he had never even met Becky and had no reason to harm her. Throughout the interrogation, Danny's demeanor was defensive. He was angry and frustrated, lashing out at the detectives who questioned him. He accused them of targeting him because of his criminal past and his Mexican nationality, calling the investigation a witch hunt. Despite his protests, police remained suspicious of Danny. His violent history and proximity to the crime scene made him a person of interest. However, as the interrogation continued, it became clear that there was little evidence to tie Danny directly to Becky's murder. There were no witnesses who could place him at the scene at the time of the crime, and no physical evidence connected him to the murder. While his presence in the area was suspicious, it wasn't enough to charge him. Danny was eventually released, but police kept him under close surveillance, aware that his volatile nature and criminal background made him a potential threat. As the investigation into Becky Frederickson's murder dragged on without a clear suspect, frustration began to set in for the detectives. But on the morning of September 18, 2019, a breakthrough came when Margaret Ruth Breedlove made a shocking revelation that changed the course of the case. Ruth, during a follow-up interview with detectives, disclosed that she was pregnant, and the father was none other than her own son-in-law, Michael Frederickson. This revelation stunned the police. It added a new layer of complexity to an already tangled web of relationships. Detectives knew that this revelation could be the key to understanding the motive behind Becky's brutal murder. The news of Ruth's pregnancy was a bombshell, suggesting that the affair between Ruth and Michael wasn't just a fling, but something far more serious. With this new information in hand, the police doubled down on their investigation. They decided to re-examine the crime scene and the evidence collected earlier, hoping to uncover any overlooked details. On September 20, 2019, 2 days after Ruth's confession, detectives revisited Becky's house, where the murder had taken place. Inside, the crime scene remained eerily untouched, a stark reminder of the violence that had occurred there. The detectives carefully combed through the area, focusing on the rolling pin that had been used as the murder weapon. Forensic experts reanalyzed the rolling pin, this time looking for any traces of DNA or fingerprints that might have been missed during the initial examination. Meanwhile, detectives also turned their attention to Michael Frederickson. Armed with the knowledge of Ruth's pregnancy, they began to put together a timeline of events leading up to Becky's murder. They learned that Michael had been increasingly anxious in the weeks before the crime, reportedly distancing himself from both his wife and Ruth. He had also made several uncharacteristic mistakes at work, which coworkers later attributed to his distracted state of mind. Could he have known Ruth was pregnant with his child? And could Becky have known this shocking secret? The breakthrough came when detectives discovered a series of deleted text messages on Michael's phone, which they were able to recover with the help of digital forensic experts. These messages revealed a heated argument between Michael and Becky on the night of her death. In the texts, Becky confronted Michael about his affair with Ruth, adding the binky emoji, and Michael, in a panic, admitted to the relationship. The argument escalated quickly, and the final message from Michael suggested he was going to, quote, "F you to death." With this new evidence, the police had what they needed to tie Michael directly to the murder. The text provided a clear motive. Michael had killed Becky in a desperate attempt to escape the fallout from his affair and Ruth's pregnancy. On the evening of September 21, 2019, after uncovering the damning text messages and learning about Ruth's pregnancy, police were confident that they had enough evidence to arrest Michael Frederickson. Michael, 35, was a successful financial advisor in San Antonio, known for his calm and collected demeanor. However, beneath the surface, he was a man trapped by his own secrets and sexual desires. His affair with his mother-in-law, Ruth, and the news that she was pregnant with his child had driven him to a breaking point. The detectives decided to approach Michael at his home, a modest house in a quiet San Antonio neighborhood. They arrived just after 8 p.m. when they knew Michael would likely be home. The air was thick with tension as they knocked on the door. When Michael answered, the TV set to how-to videos about child raising. He appeared tired and on edge, a stark contrast to the composed image he usually projected. The lead detective informed Michael that they needed to talk about new developments in the case. Michael hesitated but allowed them inside. The detectives wasted no time confronting him with the evidence, the recovered text messages, Ruth's pregnancy, and the clear motive that had emerged. As they laid out the details, Michael's calm facade began to crumble. At first, he tried to deny everything, claiming that the messages were taken out of context and that he and Becky had simply argued, as many couples do. But when Detective Diaz mentioned Ruth's pregnancy, Michael's expression changed. The color drained from his face, and he became visibly agitated, pacing the room and avoiding my contact. Realizing that the police had him cornered, Michael finally broke down. He confessed to the affair and admitted that on the night of Becky's murder, he had lost control. When Becky confronted him about the affair after Ruth literally waved her positive pregnancy test in her infertile daughter's face, he panicked. In a fit of rage and desperation, he grabbed the rolling pin from the kitchen counter and beat her to death with it. He explained that he believed eliminating Becky would somehow solve his problems, allowing him to start a new life with Ruth and their unborn child. The detectives arrested Michael on the spot, reading him his rights as they placed him in handcuffs. Michael offered no resistance. His head hung low in resignation. As the police led him out of the house, neighbors gathered on their porches, shocked to see the man they knew being taken away for such a brutal crime. The extended Frederickson family, devastated by the news, struggled to comprehend how their once loving husband and son-in-law could commit such a heinous act. For them, The arrest marked the beginning of a long and painful journey toward justice. Michael Frederickson's trial began on December 30, 2019, at the Bexar County Courthouse in San Antonio. The case quickly drew attention from local news outlets like KSA 12 and the San Antonio Express News. Reporters lined up outside the courthouse, eager to cover every detail of the shocking murder case involving a respected financial advisor, his wife, and her mother. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Lisa Perez-Bruto, a sharp, no-nonsense prosecutor known for her methodical approach in the courtroom. Perez-Bruto painted a chilling picture of Michael as a man driven to murder by the pressure of his affair with Ruth Breedlove and her unexpected pregnancy. She argued that Michael, unable to face the consequences of his actions, brutally killed Becky in a desperate attempt to escape his crumbling life. Perez's case was built around the text messages recovered from Michael's phone, Ruth's pregnancy, and Michael's own confession to the police. On the other side, the defense attorney, Mark Caldwell, tried to portray Michael as a man under extreme emotional distress. Caldwell, known for his ability to sway juries with his empathetic approach, argued that Michael never intended to kill Becky. Instead, Caldwell claimed that the crime was a tragic accident, the result of a heated argument that spiraled out of control. He urged the jury to consider Michael's previously clean record and the stress he was under at the time. Throughout the trial, Becky's family sat in the courtroom, their grief palpable. They listened intently as witnesses took the stand, recounting the events leading up to Becky's death. After a week of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before reaching a verdict. On January 7, 2020, Michael Frederickson was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a decision that was met with relief from Becky's family, who felt that justice had been served. The verdict brought some closure to Becky's loved ones, but the emotional scars left by the crime would take much longer to heal. The case left the San Antonio community in shock, a stark reminder of how quickly a seemingly perfect life can unravel. In the aftermath of the trial, the lives of everyone involved in the case changed dramatically. Michael Frederickson began his life sentence at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's William P. Hobby Unit, a stark contrast to the comfortable life he once knew. Behind bars, Michael had plenty of time to reflect on the choices that led him to this point. His reputation in San Antonio was ruined, and he became a symbol of betrayal and deceit. Ruth Breedlove, reeling from the revelations that had come to light during the trial, found herself ostracized by the community. The affair with Michael, once a secret passion, was now public knowledge. Ruth moved out of San Antonio, seeking to start over in the new city where no one knew her story. However, the emotional toll of the trial and the loss of her daughter weighed heavily on her. The pregnancy, once a source of excitement, became a painful reminder of the destruction she had helped cause. Ruth ultimately decided to give the child up for adoption, believing it was the best way to ensure a better future. As the months passed, the story of Becky Frederickson's murder became another tragic chapter in San Antonio's history. But for those who had known her, the loss was a wound that would never fully heal. Our story begins with Dave Markerson, a 58-year-old financial analyst living in Fishers, Indiana. Dave was a hardworking man known for his smart mind and calm demeanor. He lived with his second wife, Vivi, and had 2 adult children from his first marriage, Jason and Lana. Dave was well respected in his community and had a stable job that he loved. Dave graduated from Indiana University with a degree in finance. He had a successful career working for a well-known financial firm in Indianapolis. Despite his busy work schedule, Dave always made time for his family. He enjoyed playing chess with his friends at the local chess club and reading mystery novels by authors like Agatha Christie and Arthur Conan Doyle. His favorite book was The Hound of the Baskervilles. Dave's personality was warm and kind. He was always there to help his friends and family. His children, Jason and Lana, loved him dearly. Jason, 25, was trying to find his way in the world and had a complicated relationship with his father. Lana, 24, admired her father and often saw his advice for her event-planning business. In the days before his death, Dave was excited about the upcoming Christmas holiday. He looked forward to spending time with his family and had already bought gifts for everyone. Dave's favorite part of the holiday season was decorating the Christmas tree and watching classic Christmas movies like It's a Wonderful Life and Die Hard. He enjoyed the festive atmosphere and loved seeing the joy on his family's faces. On December 20, 2007, Dave was planning to attend a Christmas party of his office. He was in good spirits and had even picked out a special tie with Santa Claus on it. Dave's last few days were filled with joy and anticipation as he made plans to celebrate Christmas with his loved ones. Dave's friends and colleagues remember him as a dedicated and generous person. His sudden death shocked everyone who knew him. The news of his passing was covered by the local media, and many people in the community mourned his loss. Dave's life seemed perfect on the outside, but he was unaware of the dark secrets that would soon come to light. On the morning of December 21, 2007, it was a cold and cloudy day in Fishers, Indiana. Snowflakes gently fell from the sky, covering the ground in the light dusting of white. Inside the Marcherson home, the Christmas decorations sparkled with festive lights, and a soft holiday tune played on the radio. Lana Marcherson, Dave's 24-year-old daughter, woke up early. She planned to finish some work for her event-planning business before meeting a friend for lunch at the local Applebee's. As she walked down the stairs, she noticed that her father, Dave, wasn't up yet. It was unusual because Dave was always an early riser. Concerned, Lana went to the living room, where she found her father lying on the couch. At first, she thought he was asleep. She called out to him softly, "Dad, it's time to wake up." But Dave didn't move. Lana approached him and gently shook his shoulder. When he still didn't respond, she noticed his skin was cold to the touch. Panic began to set in. Lana's heart raced as she checked for a pulse, but there was none. Overwhelmed with fear and confusion, she called 911. "My dad is not breathing. I think he's dead," she cried, her voice trembling. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way. Within minutes, emergency responders arrived at the scene. The paramedics confirmed that Dave was dead. Lana was in shock and disbelief, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't understand how her father, who had been healthy and happy just the day before, could be gone. Detective Billy Pestian, a seasoned investigator with the Fishers Police Department, was called to the scene. He observed the living room, noting the cozy, festive setting. Dave's body was lying peacefully on the couch, with no visible signs of trauma. At first glance, it appeared to be a natural death. The news of Dave's sudden passing quickly spread through the community. Friends and neighbors gathered outside the Marcherson home, whispering in hushed tones. The local news station, WTHR Channel 13, reported on Dave's death, highlighting his contributions to the community and his loving family. Lana's discovery of her father's body was a heartbreaking moment that left her in a state of shock. She couldn't comprehend the loss and kept replaying the events in her mind. The once joyful holiday season had turned into a time of mourning and sorrow for the Marcherson family. On December 21, 2007, Detective Billy Pestian arrived promptly at the Marcherson home after receiving the emergency call. It was a cold and cloudy morning, with a light dusting of snow on the ground. Detective Pestian was known for his meticulous attention to detail and calm demeanor. The living room was decorated with festive Christmas lights and a beautifully adorned tree. The scene seemed peaceful, but Detective Pestian sensed something was off. Dave Marcherson's body lay on the couch, appearing as if he had peacefully fallen asleep. There were no signs of a struggle or any visible injuries. The first responders were already there, and the paramedics had confirmed Dave's death. Detective Pestian began his investigation by carefully examining the room. He noticed a teacup on the coffee table next to Dave, which seemed out of place given the circumstances. He instructed the forensic team to collect the teacup and any other potential evidence for further analysis. Detective Pestian then turned his attention to Lana, who was still in shock and being comforted by a neighbor. He gently asked her about the events leading up to the discovery of her father's body. Lana explained that she had found him that morning and immediately called 911. She mentioned that Dave had seemed perfectly fine the night before and had even been looking forward to the office Christmas party. As the investigation continued, Detective Pestian called in the coroner to conduct a preliminary examination of Dave's body. The coroner, Dr. Susan Mancoro, was an experienced professional known for her thoroughness. She noted that while there were no external injuries, Dave's skin had an unusual discoloration. Dr. Taylor suspected poisoning and took samples for toxicology testing. As the day progressed, Detective Pestian received a call from the lab. The preliminary toxicology report indicated the presence of a rare toxin in Dave's system, confirming Dr. Mancoro's suspicion. This discovery changed the course of the investigation, turning it from a potential natural death to a suspected homicide. The first suspect in the case was Vivi Marcherson Greaves, Dave's 19-year-old second wife. Vivi was known for her charm and sociable nature. She worked as an event planner and was well-liked in her community. Vivi often organized memorable events and was known for her attention to detail. However, beneath her friendly exterior, Vivi had a complicated personal life. Detective Billy Pestian and his team arrived at Vivi's office, a local event planning business in Fishers, Indiana. The office was decorated for the holidays with bright lights and festive decorations. Vivi greeted them with a warm smile, but the detectives noticed a hint of nervousness in her eyes. They asked her to come to the station for questioning. At the police station, Detective Pestian began the interrogation. Vivi seemed calm but cautious. She explained that she had spent the previous evening at home with Dave, watching Hallmark movies and enjoying a quiet night in. When asked about her relationship with Dave, Vivi described it as loving and supportive. However, Detective Pestian pressed further, mentioning rumors of an affair between Vivi and her stepson, Jason. Vivi's demeanor changed slightly. She denied any romantic involvement with Jason, insisting they were just close due to their shared love for event planning. Despite her calm exterior, Vivi's answers were often vague and evasive. The detectives knew they needed more concrete evidence. As the questioning continued, Detective Pestian asked Vivi about the teacup found next to Dave's body. Vivi hesitated before explaining that it was part of their nightly routine for Dave to drink tea before bed. She insisted that she had no idea how the toxin could have gotten into the tea. Her answers seemed rehearsed, and Detective Pestian noted her increasing nervousness. The motive for Vivi was becoming clearer. If she was indeed having an affair with Jason, Dave's death could free her from a loveless marriage and allow her to be with Jason openly. The detectives also discovered financial records showing that Dave had a substantial life insurance policy, with Vivi as the beneficiary. Despite Vivi's calm demeanor, her vague answers and potential motives made her a prime suspect. Detective Pestian knew they needed more evidence to either confirm or rule out her involvement in Dave's death. The investigation into Vivi Markerson Greaves was just beginning, and the detectives were determined to uncover the truth behind the murder. As the detectives continued their investigation, they knew they had to dig deeper into Vivi's personal life and her relationship with Jason. The next steps would involve interviewing more people and looking for any inconsistencies in Vivi's story. But truth was out there, and Detective Pestian and his team were committed to finding it. The second suspect in the case was Jason Marcherson, Dave's 25-year-old son. Jason was known for his sharp mind and resourcefulness. He had a complicated relationship with his father and had spent some time in a mental facility. Jason had recently developed a romantic relationship with his stepmother, Vivi, which made him a prime suspect. Detective Billy Pestian and his team arrived at Jason's apartment in downtown Indianapolis. Jason greeted them with a wary look, aware of the gravity of the situation. The detectives asked him to come to the station for questioning. At the police station, Detective Pestian began the interrogation. Jason seemed calm but guarded. He explained that he had been at his apartment the night before Dave's death, working on a project. When asked about his relationship with his father, Jason admitted that they had their differences but insisted that he would never harm him. Detective Pestian then brought up the rumors of Jason's affair with Vivi. Jason's calm demeanor faltered slightly. He admitted to having feelings for Vivi, but denied any involvement in Dave's death. He claimed that their relationship was consensual and that they had planned to talk to Dave about it after the holidays. The detectives pressed further, asking Jason about his recent financial troubles. Jason revealed that he had been struggling with an addiction to marijuana and had been borrowing money from his father to support his habit. He also admitted that he had been blackmailing Vivi for money, threatening to expose their affair if she didn't pay him. The motive for Jason was becoming clearer. If Dave were out of the picture, Jason could potentially gain access to more money and continue his relationship with Vivi without fear of exposure. The detectives also discovered that Jason had recently purchased a large quantity of the rare toxin found in Dave's system. Despite his calm exterior, Jason's admissions and potential motives made him a prime suspect. Detective Pestian knew they needed more evidence to either confirm or rule out his involvement in Dave's death. The investigation into Jason Marcherson was just beginning, and the detectives were determined to uncover the truth. As the detectives continued their investigation, they knew they had to dig deeper into Jason's personal life and his relationship with Vivi. The next steps would involve interviewing more people and looking for any inconsistencies in Jason's story. The truth was out there, and Detective Pestian and his team were committed to finding it. The detectives left no stone unturned, ensuring that every detail was examined and every lead followed. They were determined to bring justice for Dave Marcherson and uncover the true story behind his tragic death. On December 23, 2007, just 2 days before Christmas, the weather in Fishers, Indiana, was cold and overcast. Detective Billy Pestian received a call that would change the course of the investigation. New evidence had been found in Dave Marcherson's home. The discovery provided a crucial breakthrough in the case. Earlier that morning, a neighbor had noticed something unusual while walking her dog. She saw an envelope sticking out from under a flower pot on the Marchersons' porch. Curious, she picked it up and saw that it was addressed to Detective Pestian. The neighbor immediately called the police, and Detective Pestian rushed to the scene. The envelope contained a letter and a small vial. The letter was unsigned but provided detailed information about the rare toxin found in Dave's system. The writer claimed to know who the killer was and provided specific details about how the toxin had been acquired and used. The letter also mentioned a hidden stash of documents in the Marchersons' attic that would reveal the true motive behind the murder. Detective Pestian and his team quickly obtained a warrant to search the attic. Inside, they found a lockbox. Using tools to carefully open it, they discovered several important documents, including financial records, personal letters, and a detailed plan outlining how the murder was to be carried out. The documents pointed to a well-planned conspiracy. Among the papers was a receipt for the purchase of the rare toxin, dated 2 months before Dave's death. The name on the receipt was Lana Marcherson, Dave's 24-year-old daughter. The detectives were shocked by this revelation, as Lana had not been a primary suspect up until this point. The new evidence painted a different picture of the crime. Detective Pestian and his team reviewed the documents thoroughly, uncovering Lana's hidden motives. The letters revealed her deep jealousy over Jason's relationship with Vivi and her desire to remove her father from the picture to gain control over the family's finances and the event planning business she co-owned with Vivi. The police responded to this new evidence by calling Lana in for further questioning. When confronted with the documents, Lana's demeanor changed from cooperative to defensive. She denied any involvement at first, but eventually broke down under pressure, revealing the extent of her involvement in the plot. Detective Pestian knew they were getting closer to solving the case. The new evidence provided a clear motive and linked Lana directly to the crime. The police continued to gather more information, determined to bring justice to Dave Marcherson's tragic death. The third suspect in the case was Lana Marcherson, Dave's 24-year-old daughter. Lana was a pragmatic and ambitious young woman who co-owned an event planning business with Vivi. She was known for her hard work and dedication, and she was fiercely loyal to Vivi. However, her jealousy and complex emotions added a layer of intrigue to the case. On December 24, 2007, Detective Billy Pestian and his team called Lana in for further questioning. It was Christmas Eve, and the weather outside was cold with a light snow falling. The festive decorations at the police station stood in stark contrast to the serious atmosphere of the interrogation room. Lana arrived at the station, visibly nervous but trying to maintain her composure. Detective Pestian began the interrogation by asking Lana about her relationship with her father. Lana described her father as loving and supportive, but admitted they have their differences, especially regarding the family business and her personal life. When Detective Pestian brought up the newly discovered documents, Lana's demeanor shifted. She became defensive, denying any involvement in her father's death. However, the detectives presented her with the receipt for the rare toxin, which bore her name. The evidence was overwhelming, and Lana's story began to unravel. Lana eventually confessed to her part in the plot. She admitted to feeling jealous of her brother Jason's relationship with Vivi and her father's control over the family's finances. Lana saw an opportunity to gain control over the business and her father's estate by eliminating him. She had supplied Vivi with the rare toxin, encouraging her to use it to poison Dave. The detectives were stunned by Lana's cold and calculated confession. She revealed how she had manipulated both Vivi and Jason to achieve her goals. Her jealousy and ambition had driven her to commit a heinous crime, betraying her own family in the process. Lana's motive became clear. She wanted to remove her father from the picture to gain financial control and to keep Vivi for herself. Her unrequited love for Vivi and jealousy of Jason's relationship with her fueled her actions. Lana's confession provided the final piece of the puzzle, linking her directly to the crime and revealing her as the true mastermind behind the murder. Detective Pestian and his team were now confident they had uncovered the full extent of the plot. Lana's detailed confession, along with the physical evidence, provided a clear picture of her involvement. The investigation into Lana Marcherson revealed a chilling tale of jealousy, manipulation, and betrayal, bringing them closer to solving the tragic case. On December 25, 2007, the weather in Fishers, Indiana, was cold and snowy. It was Christmas morning, and the town was quiet. Detective Billy Pestian and his team had gathered enough evidence to identify the murderer. The killer was Vivi Marterson, Dave's 19-year-old wife. Her motives were a mix of desperation to escape her loveless marriage and a desire to be with her stepson, Jason. Vivi's plan was meticulously crafted. She had purchased a rare toxin with the help of Lana, Dave's daughter. Vivi then mixed the poison into Dave's favorite evening tea. The poison caused a slow and painful death, which initially appeared natural due to its subtle symptoms. Vivi thought she had planned the perfect crime, but the evidence told a different story. Detective Pestian reviewed the evidence one last time before heading to the Marterson home to make the arrest. Vivi had become the primary suspect after Lana's confession. The detailed plan found in the attic, the toxicology report, and the receipt for the rare toxin all pointed to Vivi's involvement. The detectives were ready to bring her to justice. As Detective Pestian and his team approached the Marterson home, they saw the festive Christmas lights twinkling. Despite the holiday cheer, the atmosphere was tense. The detectives knocked on the door, and Vivi answered, her face showing a mix of surprise and fear. "Vivi Marterson, you are under arrest for the murder of Dave Marterson," Detective Pestian announced. Vivi was shocked, but quickly composed herself. She was handcuffed and led to the police car, her neighbors watching in disbelief. At the police station, Vivi was questioned again. This time, with all the evidence laid out before her, she broke down and confessed. She admitted to poisoning Dave to be with Jason and escape her unhappy marriage. She also revealed that Jason had been blackmailing her for money to support his drug addiction. Feeling trapped and betrayed, Vivi had hoped that confessing might bring her some leniency. The reaction from Dave's family was a mix of relief and sorrow. His children, Jason and Lana, were devastated by the betrayal and loss. The neighbors and friends who had known the Martersons were shocked to learn the truth. The small town of Fishers, Indiana, was rocked by the news of the murder and the dark secrets that had come to light. Vivi's arrest brought a sense of closure to the investigation. Detective Pestian and his team had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. The case was a stark reminder of how jealousy and desperation could lead to tragic consequences. As Vivi was taken away, the town began to heal, knowing that justice had been served. The trial of Vivi Marterson began on February 10, 2008, in Fishers, Indiana. The courtroom was filled with reporters, family members, and curious locals. The weather was cold and snowy, reflecting the somber mood inside. The prosecutor, Malia Jacobs-Chan, a 45-year-old seasoned attorney known for her determination and sharp wit, presented the case against Vivi. Malia Jacobs-Chan laid out the evidence methodically, explaining how Vivi had purchased the rare toxin with the help of Lana and used it to poison her husband, Dave. She described the financial and romantic motives, highlighting Vivi's desperation to escape her marriage and be with Jason. Jacobs called several witnesses, including Detective Billy Pestian, who detailed the investigation and the evidence found. The defense attorney, Mickey Mouse Brown, a 50-year-old with a reputation for defending tough cases, argued that Vivi was coerced by Jason and Lana. He painted Vivi as a victim of manipulation, desperate and frightened. Brown tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's timeline and motives, suggesting that Jason and Lana were the real masterminds. The courtroom was tense as the trial unfolded. Dave's family sat in the front row, their faces a mix of sadness and anger. They listened intently as both sides presented their arguments. The jury was visibly affected by the emotional testimonies and the detailed evidence. After several days of deliberation, the jury found Vivi Marterson guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was announced on February 20, 2008. Vivi showed little emotion as the verdict was read, but her pale face and trembling hands revealed her fear. The judge sentenced Vivi to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence brought a sense of justice to Dave's family, though the pain of losing him remained. The impact of the trial and verdict rippled through the community. Dave's children, Jason and Lana, were deeply affected. Jason, already struggling with his drug addiction, found it hard to cope with the guilt and shame. Lana, despite her involvement, expressed remorse and cooperated with the authorities, which resulted in a lesser charge and a reduced sentence. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a tragic chapter for the Marterson family. The small town of Fishers, Indiana, was left to grapple with the shocking events and the dark secrets that had come to light. The case was widely covered in the media, with news outlets and local stations providing extensive coverage of the trial and its aftermath. In the end, justice was served, but the scars left behind would take a long time to heal. The Marterson family and the community of Fishers would forever remember the dark love triangle that led to Dave's tragic death. After the trial, life in Fishers, Indiana, slowly began to return to normal. However, for the Marterson family, the aftermath of the murder left deep scars. Dave Markerson's death and the trial of his wife, Vivi, had changed their lives forever. Jason Markerson, Dave's 25-year-old son, struggled the most. His drug addiction had worsened during the trial, and he had a hard time dealing with the guilt and shame of his involvement with Vivi. He checked into a rehabilitation center in Indianapolis, hoping to overcome his addiction and start anew. The path to recovery was long and challenging, but Jason was determined to turn his life around. Lana Markerson, Dave's 24-year-old daughter, faced her own set of challenges. Her role in the murder and the manipulation of Vivi had been exposed during the trial. Despite her cooperation with the authorities, she received a reduced sentence of 5 years in prison. Lana expressed deep remorse for her actions and planned to use her time in prison to reflect and rehabilitate. Vivi Markerson, now serving a like sentence, adapted to life behind bars. She spent her days reflecting on the choices that led to her imprisonment. Vivi joined a prison program that focused on education and personal growth. While she would never leave prison, she hoped to find some form of redemption. The town of Fishers, Indiana, slowly healed from the tragedy. The residents, who had been shocked by the events, came together to support one another. Community events and gatherings helped restore a sense of normalcy and unity. In the end, the tragic events surrounding Dave Markerson's death served as a stark reminder of the consequences of jealousy, betrayal, and desperation. The case had left a lasting impact on all those involved, but it also highlighted the importance of justice, redemption, and the strength of the human spirit.